The infinite library. Paradox. What if every book ever written and yet to be written already exists? What if somewhere in this vast universe there exists a library containing every possible book that could ever be written? Every story already told, every secret yet to be discovered, every thought you'll ever have, all waiting silently on endless shelves stretching into infinity. Welcome to the realm where imagination and reality blur into one. Tonight, we explore a paradox that challenges our understanding of creativity, possibility, and the very nature of information itself. Are these merely intellectual puzzles, or doorways to realities we haven't yet perceived? Imagine yourself walking through an immense library. The corridors extend beyond what your eyes can see. The shelves tower above you, filled with books of identical size, but containing every possible combination of letters. In this library exists your complete biography. Not just the life you've lived, but the life you might have lived had you made different choices. The thoughts you'll think tomorrow, the secrets of the universe. This is Jorge Luis Borges's Library of Babel, a thought experiment that proposes a universe in the form of a vast library containing all possible 410-page books with every possible combination of characters. Most books would be complete nonsense, random arrangements of letters, but hidden among them would be every coherent text that has been or could be written. But here lies our first paradox. In such a library, how would you find meaning amidst the chaos? If every possible book exists, then for every true book about your life, there exist countless false ones. For every accurate history, millions of distorted versions. How would you distinguish truth from fiction when both exist simultaneously, bound in identical volumes? Perhaps more unsettling is what this implies about creativity itself. In this infinite library, every novel you might write already exists. Every poem, every song, every scientific discovery, all already there, waiting to be found rather than created. Are authors and artists then not creators, but merely discoverers, stumbling upon works that have always existed in the realm of possibility? Is Shakespeare's genius diminished if his works already existed in potential form? Or is the act of finding the right words among infinite possibilities itself the true creative act? Consider now a more modern interpretation, the digital library of Babel that exists online today. Using algorithms, it contains every possible page of text that could be written using the English alphabet. Somewhere in this digital infinity is the cure for cancer, the answer to whether we are alone in the universe, and the last words you will ever speak. But this leads us to another paradox: information without knowledge. If all possible information exists within this library, does it actually contain any knowledge at all? Knowledge implies meaning, understanding, context. In an infinite library where truth and falsehood exist in equal measure, perhaps all meaning is lost. Think about this as you drift deeper into contemplation. What if our universe itself is such a library? What if all possible realities exist simultaneously, and our consciousness simply navigates through one particular arrangement of possibilities? Perhaps in another shelf of this cosmic library, you are reading a different version of these words, or perhaps you wrote them yourself. The ancient Greeks believed in the concept of the Akashic records, a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intentions ever to have occurred in the past, present, or future. What if these records are simply another manifestation of our infinite library? Time itself becomes fluid in this context. If every possible book already exists, then the future is already written, not predetermined, but existing in all its possible variations. Are we simply turning pages in books that have always been there? As your mind continues to explore these endless corridors of possibility, consider one final paradox, the Observer Paradox. In this infinite library, a book cannot be meaningful until it is read. It is the consciousness of the reader that transforms random symbols into meaning, chaos into order. Without you, the reader, the observer, does the library truly contain anything at all? Or is it your mind that creates reality from possibility, meaning from randomness? What if you are both reader and author in this cosmic library? What if the act of living is both reading and writing your story simultaneously? Each choice you make eliminates infinite possibilities while creating new ones. As you drift now toward the edges of thought, lingering in that space between knowing and dreaming, ask yourself, What book are you reading in this infinite library? What story are you telling? And what chapters remain unwritten, waiting for you to turn the page? Perhaps the greatest paradox of all is that in a universe of infinite possibilities, it is our finite lives that give meaning to existence. In limitation, we find purpose. In choices, we find freedom. And in paradoxes, perhaps we find the truest reflection of our reality, complex, contradictory, and infinitely fascinating. What if the answers you seek have always existed, waiting patiently on a shelf in that infinite library for you to find them? What if tonight, as you close your eyes, your dreams take you wandering through those endless corridors, your fingers brushing against the spine of a book that contains all the secrets of tomorrow? The paradox of nothingness. Can nothing truly exist, or does the very idea of nothing contradict itself? What if true nothingness is impossible? What if the very concept of nothing is itself something, a thought, an idea, a placeholder for what we cannot comprehend? Perhaps the void we imagine is merely another form of existence we have yet to understand. Welcome to the borderlands of thought, where even emptiness becomes profound. Tonight, we explore a paradox that philosophers and scientists have pondered since humans first gazed into the darkness and wondered what lies beyond. Are these merely abstract puzzles, or gateways to understanding the fundamental nature of reality itself? Imagine yourself floating in what seems to be perfect emptiness. No light, no sound, no sensation, just absence. But even in this imagined void, your consciousness remains, observing, thinking, being. And in that act of observation, doesn't nothingness immediately transform into something? The moment you conceptualize nothingness, haven't you already filled it with thought? This is the first layer of our paradox, the observer problem. True nothingness would require the absence of all observers, all measurement, all conceptualization. Yet without these things, how could we ever confirm that nothingness exists? The very act of confirming nothing creates something. The ancient philosophers grappled with this contradiction. Parmenides argued that non-being could not exist, for to speak of non-being is to speak of something, thus contradicting its very nature. Nothing comes from nothing, Lucretius later wrote, suggesting that absolute void was impossible. Even emptiness, they realized, must somehow be. But our exploration grows deeper when we turn to modern physics. Quantum mechanics tells us that even the vacuum of space is not truly empty. It teems with quantum fluctuations, virtual particles that pop in and out of existence, energy fields that permeate what appears to be nothing. The void breathes with possibility, pregnant with potential energy and matter. Is this not the ultimate paradox? That what we consider the epitome of absence, the vacuum of space, is actually filled with the seeds of everything. That emptiness itself contains the building blocks of all that is. Perhaps more unsettling is how this paradox extends to our own consciousness. When you try to empty your mind completely, to think of absolutely nothing, what happens? The harder you try to grasp nothingness, the more it slips through your fingers. Thoughts about nothingness are still thoughts. Awareness of emptiness is still awareness. As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. What if nothingness is not the opposite of existence, but simply another form of it? What if the binary of something, nothing, is itself an illusion created by our limited perception? The Buddhists speak of shunyata, emptiness not as non-existence, but as the absence of independent existence. All things, they suggest, exist only in relation to other things. Perhaps true nothingness cannot exist precisely because existence itself is relational, interconnected, interdependent. Time, too, becomes entangled in this paradox. We often imagine nothing as what existed before the universe began. But what meaning does before have when time itself may be part of what emerged from this primordial state? Can nothingness exist outside of time? Or does the very concept of existence require temporal context? As your mind continues to orbit these questions, consider one final contradiction, the linguistic paradox. The word nothing is itself something, a concept, a symbol, a tool for communication. We have created elaborate languages and mathematical systems to describe and analyze what is not there. Isn't there something profoundly paradoxical about using something, language, to describe the absence of anything? What if nothingness is not a state to be discovered, but a boundary of thought, the horizon where our understanding reaches its limit? What if the paradox itself is the point, revealing the frameworks and limitations of human cognition? As you now drift toward the edges of wakefulness, lingering in that liminal space between thought and dream, ask yourself, when you close your eyes and all sensory input fades, what remains? Is the darkness behind your eyelids nothing, or is it teeming with the electricity of your thoughts, the subtle rhythm of your breath, the quiet persistence of being? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that in contemplating nothingness, we discover the impossibility of our own non-existence. In seeking the void, we find ourselves conscious, questioning, irrevocably present. And in this paradox, perhaps we find a profound truth, that existence itself may be the only inevitability in an otherwise uncertain universe, that something, rather than nothing, may be the natural state of all that is. What if tonight, as consciousness slips away and sleep embraces you, you glimpse not the void, but the infinite something that lies within apparent emptiness? What dreams might emerge from the fertile nothing of your sleeping mind, the observer's illusion? Does the universe exist if no one is there to perceive it? What if reality itself is not an objective fact, but a dance between observer and observed? What if the trees in forests do more than make sounds when they fall? What if they only exist because something, somewhere, is there to witness their existence? Tonight, we wander through the mist between perception and reality. Welcome to a realm where certainty dissolves and questions bloom like midnight flowers. We explore a paradox that has haunted philosophers, physicists, and dreamers alike, the observer's illusion. Are we discovering the universe, or are we, in some profound way, creating it through the act of observation? Imagine yourself alone in a vast darkness. You strike a match, and suddenly, a small sphere of reality ignites around you. Objects emerge from the void, shapes, colors, textures, but only within the radius of your light. Beyond that boundary, does anything exist with certainty, or does it remain in a state of possibility, waiting for your light to define it? This is the first layer of our paradox, the boundary of perception. We can only confirm the existence of what we can observe, measure, or detect. But what of everything beyond our reach? Does the universe continue unaltered in our absence, or does it exist in some indeterminate state, like Schrödinger's cat, both being and non-being until the moment of observation? The ancient philosopher Bishop Berkeley proposed a radical idea. To be is to be perceived. In his view, objects exist only insofar as they are perceived. Esse est percipi. When no one observes an object, it exists only in the mind of God, the ultimate observer. Without perception, he argued, there could be no existence. But our exploration deepens when we enter the quantum realm. The double-slit experiment reveals something extraordinary. Particles behave differently when observed. Unobserved, electrons pass through both slits simultaneously, creating an interference pattern. But when measured or observed, they behave like discrete particles, passing through just one slit. Observation itself appears to collapse possibility into definite reality. Is this not the ultimate expression of our paradox? That the very act of looking determines what there is to see? That reality might be fluid, undetermined, until consciousness fixes it in place like amber preserving a moment in time. Perhaps more unsettling is how this extends to our everyday experience. We believe we see reality directly, but we don't. Our brains receive limited sensory data and construct a model of reality, filling in gaps, making assumptions, creating a seamless experience from fragments of information. What if what we call reality is merely our brain's best guess about what exists? As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. Countless wavelengths of light, sound, and energy pass through you at this very moment, all imperceptible to your senses. Neutrinos by the billions pierce your body each second. Does this invisible reality exist in the same way as the reality you can perceive? Or does it exist differently, as mathematics, as possibility, as something other than reality as you know it? The indigenous concept of dreaming suggests that reality is an ongoing creation, a continuous dialogue between the observer and the observed. What if the universe is not a fixed stage upon which consciousness performs, but a collaborative creation between awareness and possibility? Time itself becomes entangled in this question. We experience time as linear, but what if this too is merely a construction of consciousness? What if past, present, and future exist simultaneously, and it is only our observation that creates the illusion of flow, of now, of becoming? As your mind continues to follow these questions like stepping stones across a misty river, consider one final aspect: the anthropic principle. This suggests that we observe a universe finely tuned for life, precisely because only such a universe could produce observers to notice it. The very fact that we exist to ask these questions may itself determine what kind of universe we find ourselves in. What if the universe is like an infinite library of possible realities, and consciousness is the reader that gives meaning to the page it lands upon? What if observation is not passive but creative, not discovering what is, but participating in what becomes? As you now hover at the threshold of dreams, lingering in that space where thought dissolves into something else, ask yourself, when you close your eyes, does the world continue unchanged, or does it transform into a realm of pure potential, waiting for consciousness to give it form once more? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that we can never step outside our own perception to answer these questions definitively. We are trapped within the very phenomenon we seek to understand, like eyes trying to see themselves seeing. And in this paradox, perhaps we find a profound truth, that reality may not be something that exists independent of experience, but something that emerges within the sacred space between observer and observed, between consciousness and possibility. What if tonight, as awareness gives way to sleep, and the boundaries between self and world grow porous, you glimpse the universe as it might be when no one is watching? What dreams might emerge from that undetermined realm of pure potential? The dream paradox. If you can't tell whether you're dreaming, are you awake or still dreaming? What if the boundary between dreams and waking life is more permeable than we believe? What if right now, as you listen to these words, you are actually deep in slumber, constructing an elaborate reality that feels undeniably real? How would you know the difference? Welcome to the twilight realm, where certainty dissolves and reality itself becomes questionable. Tonight, we explore a paradox that has whispered through philosophy, literature, and human experience since we first began to question the nature of consciousness: the dream paradox. Are we discovering truth when we awaken, or merely shifting from one form of dreaming to another? Imagine yourself in a dream so vivid, so consistent, so logical, that nothing within it suggests you are dreaming. The sun rises and sets, gravity pulls objects downward, cause precedes effect. You feel pain, pleasure, hunger, and satiation. You remember yesterday and anticipate tomorrow. In such a dream, what evidence could possibly reveal to you that you're not experiencing reality? This is the first layer of our paradox, the problem of indistinguishability. If a dream can perfectly mimic reality in every experiential way, then experience alone cannot verify which state we occupy. The Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi pondered this when he wrote of dreaming he was a butterfly, then awakening to wonder whether he was now a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. But our exploration deepens when we consider the nature of consciousness itself. Each night, as you drift into sleep, your brain constructs entire worlds from nothing but neural activity. It creates people who don't exist, places you've never been, experiences you've never had. Yet while dreaming, you accept them as utterly real. Isn't this creative act remarkably similar to how your brain constructs your waking experience from sensory data? Is this not the ultimate expression of our paradox? That perhaps waking reality is itself a kind of dream, a narrative constructed by your brain to make sense of the limited information it receives. Neuroscience tells us that what we experience as reality is already a model, a simulation created by our minds. We don't see the world as it is, but as our brains interpret it to be. Perhaps more unsettling is how this extends to our sense of self. In dreams, you are simultaneously the creator of the experience and a participant within it. You author the drama while believing you're merely experiencing it. What if ordinary consciousness operates similarly? What if you are both the dreamer and the dreamed? As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. Ancient traditions from Hinduism to certain schools of Buddhism suggest that what we call reality is indeed a kind of collective dream, Maya, an illusion veiling a deeper truth. What if awakening in the spiritual sense is not about waking from sleep to ordinary reality, but waking from ordinary reality to something far more fundamental? The philosopher René Descartes faced this very question when seeking an unshakable foundation for knowledge. "How can I be certain that I am not dreaming right now?" he asked. His answer, cogito ergo sum, "I think, therefore I am," suggested that while he couldn't prove he wasn't dreaming, the very act of questioning his reality proved his existence in some form, dreaming or awake. Time itself behaves differently in dreams, dilating, compressing, folding back upon itself. Years can pass in dream time, while only minutes elapse in waking life. What if our linear experience of time in waking life is similarly illusory, a construct of consciousness rather than an absolute truth? As your mind continues to explore these questions like a ship navigating uncharted waters, consider one final aspect: lucid dreaming. In this state, dreamers become aware they are dreaming without awakening and can sometimes control the dream environment. What does it mean that consciousness can recognize its own creations from within them? Is this capacity for meta-awareness, knowing that you are dreaming while dreaming, a clue to understanding consciousness itself? What if reality exists on a spectrum of awareness, rather than in the binary states of dreaming and waking? What if there are depths of wakefulness beyond what we typically experience, making our ordinary consciousness seem dreamlike by comparison? As you hover now at the edge of different states of consciousness, lingering in that liminal space where thought becomes dream, ask yourself, how would you know if you were to awaken to a deeper reality? What would it feel like to recognize that what you've always accepted as waking life was itself a kind of dream? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that the question itself may be unanswerable from within the system it questions. Like a character in a novel wondering if they are fictional, we may lack access to the perspective necessary to resolve the paradox. And in this unresolvable question, perhaps we find a profound invitation to hold reality lightly, to approach experience with wonder rather than certainty, to recognize that mystery lies at the heart of consciousness itself. What if tonight, as you surrender to sleep, you're not leaving reality behind, but simply shifting to a different mode of being? What if dreams and waking are not opposites but variations on the same theme? Consciousness exploring itself through endless forms and possibilities. The Omnipotence Paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a task so impossible that even they can't complete it? What if power itself contains a fundamental contradiction? A question that unravels the very fabric of possibility and leaves us drifting in uncertainty, like stars suspended in the void between knowing and unknowing. Tonight, we explore a paradox that has whispered through time, challenging our understanding of divinity and the boundaries of the possible. The Omnipotence Paradox doesn't merely ask, it invites us into a realm where certainty dissolves into wonder, where the edges of reality blur into dreams. Imagine a being of absolute unlimited power, a force beyond comprehension, capable of creating worlds with a thought, of bending time and space to its will. Now consider, could such a being create a stone so heavy that even they couldn't lift it? The question hangs suspended in your mind, neither settling nor dispersing, like mist over still waters. If this omnipotent being cannot create such a stone, then something exists they cannot do, creating the stone, and thus they are not truly omnipotent. Yet if they can create it, there still exists something they cannot do, lifting the stone, again contradicting their omnipotence. We find ourselves caught in a loop of logic that spirals endlessly, like a staircase that leads back to itself. This isn't merely a theological puzzle, but an invitation to contemplate the nature of possibility itself. What does impossible mean when speaking of a power that transcends all limitations? Perhaps our understanding of power itself needs to be re-examined, like looking at familiar landscape from an unfamiliar height. Perhaps omnipotence is more nuanced than we first imagined. Some philosophers suggest that true omnipotence doesn't require the ability to perform logically contradictory tasks. After all, what meaning would we assign to a square circle or a married bachelor? These aren't merely difficult concepts, they're incoherent, existing beyond the boundaries of meaning itself, like trying to find north on a sphere. In this view, creating a stone too heavy to lift, while simultaneously possessing the power to lift anything, represents not a limitation of power, but a limitation of language and logic. The paradox emerges not from any constraint on omnipotence, but from our attempt to use finite language to describe the infinite, like trying to capture the ocean in a thimble. As we drift deeper into this contemplation, we might wonder whether omnipotence should be understood not as the power to do anything describable in words, but the power to do anything that is logically possible. Under this interpretation, an omnipotent being cannot be expected to perform logically contradictory tasks any more than it could make Thalbart GBL a color or Senarkal an emotion. The boundaries of power may be the boundaries of meaning itself, yet even this understanding leaves us with questions that ripple outward like stones dropped in still water. If an omnipotent being is bound by logic, then is logic itself more fundamental than divine power? Does logic exist independently, or is it a creation of the omnipotent being? Could an omnipotent being create a universe with different logical rules, where contradictions could exist without conflict? The paradox transforms before our eyes, revealing new dimensions like a crystal turned slowly in the light. Perhaps omnipotence includes the power to transcend logical constraints that bind lesser beings, to exist simultaneously in contradictory states that our minds cannot grasp. Perhaps what appears paradoxical to us is merely the limitation of human understanding when confronted with the truly infinite, like trying to comprehend the entire spectrum of light when we can only perceive a narrow band. Consider how this paradox connects to our everyday experience. We all encounter limitations, moments where our desires contradict one another, where achieving one goal means abandoning another. The paradox of omnipotence may simply be the cosmic reflection of the contradictions we navigate in our own lives, magnified to infinite proportions. What if the truth isn't found in resolving the paradox, but in embracing it? Perhaps the question isn't meant to be answered, but experienced, a gateway that dissolves conventional thought and invites us into a more expansive awareness, like a door opening onto a vista we never knew existed. As your consciousness drifts toward the edges of sleep, let this question remain with you. What limits might exist beyond our understanding? And what mysteries await in the spaces where contradiction itself becomes a path to deeper truth? What if the very nature of reality is paradoxical, both limited and limitless simultaneously? Perhaps we are not meant to solve these riddles, but to let them solve us, breaking apart our certainties until what remains is not knowledge, but wonder, like stars emerging as darkness deepens. As you close your eyes, consider that perhaps the greatest power isn't found in resolving all contradictions, but in holding them gently in the mind, allowing them to transform our understanding of what is possible and what lies beyond the horizon of our comprehension, like holding two opposing truths and finding both to be necessary. Sleep now, knowing that some questions are not obstacles to understanding, but doorways to a deeper contemplation that continues even as consciousness fades into dreams, carrying you into realms where paradox is not a problem to be solved, but a landscape to be explored. The Bootstrap Paradox. Can information or objects exist without ever being created? What if time isn't linear at all, but rather a circular labyrinth where endings become beginnings, and creation itself is merely an illusion? Within this cosmic tapestry, objects and information drift through existence, but what if some never truly had a point of origin? Tonight, we drift into one of the most perplexing temporal enigmas ever conceived, the Bootstrap Paradox, a phenomenon where an item or information exists without ever having been created, caught in an eternal loop of causality that challenges our most fundamental understanding of reality. Perhaps our universe is more fluid than we perceive, a place where effect can precede cause, and existence need not follow the rules we've come to accept as truth. Imagine, if you will, a weathered, leather-bound book of music sitting on your shelf. Inside, you discover the most hauntingly beautiful composition you've ever encountered, a piece that seems to transcend time itself. Moved by its perfection, you build a time machine and travel back centuries to meet the composer, only to discover they never wrote it. In that moment of revelation, you decide to share this masterpiece with the composer, who publishes it as their own creation. This composition eventually becomes the very book you found on your shelf, the one you carried back through time. Who then composed this music? It exists, yet it was never truly created. It emerged from nowhere, caught in a causal loop with no definable point of origin. The information simply is, suspended in an eternal cycle where every end is a beginning and every beginning has already happened. The paradox's name comes from the concept of pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps, an impossible feat that somehow becomes reality when applied to time. Just as one cannot lift themselves by pulling on their own bootstraps, information cannot create itself. Yet in the temporal loops of the Bootstrap Paradox, the impossible manifests before our eyes. Consider how this contradicts everything we understand about causality. Our minds seek linear patterns, events following one another in an orderly sequence, each effect preceded by its cause. But what happens when that sequence folds back upon itself, when the arrow of time curves into a perfect circle? Reality itself seems to unravel, revealing something more fluid and mysterious beneath. Perhaps you're now wondering about the famous thought experiment involving Shakespeare. Imagine a scholar who idolizes Shakespeare travels back in time with a complete collection of his plays. Upon arriving in Elizabethan England, the scholar discovers that Shakespeare is merely a struggling actor with no writing ability. Disillusioned, the scholar leaves behind the collection, which Shakespeare finds and copies word for word, eventually publishing these works as his own. These become the very same plays the scholar brought back in time. In this scenario, who wrote Hamlet? Who penned the immortal words, to be or not to be? The plays exist, yet they were never truly created, merely trapped in an endless causal loop without beginning or end. The information simply is, suspended in a state of perpetual existence with no point of genesis. Does this mean creation itself is an illusion? If information can exist without being created, perhaps our understanding of existence is fundamentally flawed. Maybe the universe is not a linear story being written from beginning to end, but rather a complex tapestry where all points in time exist simultaneously, connected by threads we cannot yet perceive. This paradox extends beyond mere thought experiments. Some physicists suggest that certain fundamental particles may be caught in causal loops at the quantum level, existing because they create the conditions for their own existence. Could the fabric of reality itself be woven with these self-causing threads, patterns that have no beginning because they are, in some sense, eternal? The Bootstrap Paradox shares a mystifying kinship with other temporal enigmas. Like the Grandfather Paradox, it challenges our understanding of cause and effect, though in precisely the opposite manner. While the Grandfather Paradox creates a contradiction by destroying causality, the Bootstrap Paradox creates one by completing a perfect causal circle that has no beginning. As you contemplate this paradox, allow your mind to drift toward a more profound question. If information can exist without creation, what does this reveal about the nature of ideas themselves? Perhaps concepts like music, literature, and mathematics aren't created but rather discovered. Eternal truths that have always existed, waiting patiently for minds capable of perceiving them. What if Beethoven's symphonies or Einstein's equations were never truly invented, but merely uncovered? Like archaeologists brushing away sand to reveal, what if Beethoven's symphonies or Einstein's equations were never truly invented, but merely uncovered? Like archaeologists brushing away sand to reveal artifacts that have always been there. The Bootstrap Paradox suggests a universe where information transcends time itself, where creation and discovery blur into one continuous act of revelation. As we prepare to drift away from this temporal mystery, consider one final question. What if our very consciousness is caught in such a loop? What if the thoughts forming in your mind right now are simultaneously the cause and effect of thoughts you will have in the future and have already had in the past? Perhaps we ourselves are bootstrapped into existence, our awareness emerging from a paradoxical cycle that has no true beginning. What if the paradoxes we ponder tonight are not merely puzzles to be solved, but glimpses into the true nature of a reality far more mysterious than we dare imagine? As you close your eyes and sink deeper into contemplation, remember that sometimes the questions themselves are more valuable than any answer could ever be. In a universe where time may be more illusion than reality, perhaps it is fitting that some things simply exist, timeless, eternal, and beautifully inexplicable. The simulation dilemma. If you were inside a perfect simulation, how would you ever know? What if reality as you know it is merely an elaborate illusion, a meticulously crafted simulation indistinguishable from what we call the real. Perhaps the world you perceive through your senses is nothing more than an intricate digital construct, and your consciousness merely a complex algorithm running within it. Tonight, we explore the haunting question that has intrigued philosophers, scientists, and dreamers alike: the simulation dilemma. This profound quandary asks not whether we might be living in a simulation, but something far more unsettling. If we were, how could we possibly detect it? Imagine yourself in a world so perfectly rendered that every atom, every interaction, every thought and feeling follows patterns identical to what we consider reality. The simulation hypothesis suggests that with sufficient computational power, an advanced civilization could create virtual worlds populated with conscious beings who believe their existence to be entirely authentic. These digital minds, perhaps like yours, would experience love, pain, wonder, and doubt with complete conviction that their world is real. The philosopher René Descartes once questioned whether an evil demon might be deceiving him about all his experiences. Today, we've merely updated the demon to a programmer and the deception to code. Yet the fundamental question remains unchanged. How can we trust our perceptions if they could be artificially generated? Consider the perfect simulation, one created with such sophistication that no internal test could ever reveal its artificial nature. Every experiment you design to detect inconsistencies would be processed within the simulation itself, returning results that confirm whatever natural laws were programmed into your reality. The rules of physics, the structure of mathematics, the nature of consciousness, all could be elaborate constructs designed to maintain the illusion. Some suggest we might look for glitches, moments when the simulation reveals its imperfections through computational shortcuts or errors. But in a truly advanced simulation, such glitches might be indistinguishable from what we already accept as quantum uncertainty or the inherent randomness of nature. What we call the inexplicable might simply be the edges of our programmed reality. This dilemma shares a peculiar kinship with Plato's cave allegory, where prisoners mistake shadows for reality, never suspecting the true world beyond their perceptions. We too might be witnessing mere projections, digital shadows cast by a reality we cannot access or comprehend from within our simulated existence. Perhaps more unsettling is the possibility that our creators might intervene in ways we interpret as miracles, coincidences, or inexplicable phenomena. What we call the supernatural might simply be moments when the boundaries between levels of reality temporarily blur, allowing us glimpses of the system within which we exist. The simulation dilemma also raises profound questions about consciousness itself. If your mind, your sense of self, your awareness, emerged from sufficiently complex code, would that make your experiences any less real? If you love, if you suffer, if you contemplate your existence, does it matter whether your thoughts arise from neurons or from exquisitely designed algorithms? Some physicists have suggested that our universe's seemingly arbitrary physical constants might be evidence of its simulated nature, parameters set by designers to create a stable, life-supporting environment. Others point to the quantized nature of reality at its smallest scales as potential evidence that our world is rendered only to the precision necessary, like pixels in a vast cosmic display. As you consider these possibilities, you might wonder, if we are simulations, what exists beyond our simulated world? Perhaps our creators are themselves simulations within an even higher order reality, creating an infinite regression of worlds within worlds. Or perhaps they exist in a base reality fundamentally different from anything we could comprehend from within our limited perspective. The most profound aspect of the simulation dilemma may be its implication for meaning and purpose. If we are simulations, were we created for a reason? Are we experiments, entertainment, or perhaps attempts by our creators to understand aspects of their own existence through countless iterations of simulated consciousness? As your mind drifts through these possibilities, consider that even if we are simulations, our experiences, our joys and sorrows, our questions and discoveries, remain meaningful to us within the context of our reality. The love you feel, the beauty you perceive, the connections you forge, these hold significance regardless of whether they exist as electrochemical processes or as exquisitely rendered code. What if the greatest truth is that reality itself is subjective, defined not by whether our world is real in some absolute sense, but by the authenticity of our experiences within it? Perhaps it is not the substrate of our existence that matters, but the consciousness that emerges from it, the awareness that allows us to ask these very questions. As you sink deeper into contemplation, consider one final thought. What if the question itself, whether we can know if we are in a simulation, is the most real thing about us? What if our capacity to doubt, to wonder, to imagine realities beyond our perception is the true miracle, regardless of whether we exist in base reality or as consciousness embedded within an unfathomable cosmic program? In the gentle darkness behind your closing eyes, let this question remain, not as a problem to solve, but as a doorway to wonder about the true nature of the reality we call home. The time traveler's gamble. If you go back in time and prevent your birth, who went back in time? What if the past is not fixed, but malleable, a canvas awaiting the brush of those who might one day journey backward through the corridors of time? What becomes of reality when cause and effect no longer follow their ordained sequence, when the future reaches back to erase its own origins? Tonight, we venture into the shadowy realm of temporal paradoxes to explore the time traveler's gamble, perhaps the most unsettling question in all of theoretical chronology. If you were to journey backward through time and, through some action or intervention, prevent your own birth, who then traveled through time? The person who no longer exists, or a ghost of possibilities erased? Imagine standing before a gleaming time machine, its mechanisms humming with potential. You step inside, coordinates set for decades past, perhaps to prevent a fateful meeting between your parents, or to subtly alter the course of events that led to your conception. The machine activates, reality blurs, and you emerge in the world that once was, carrying knowledge of a future that may never come to be. As you succeed in your mission, perhaps through something as simple as delaying your father from catching a particular train, or encouraging your mother to accept a job in a distant city, you've created the perfect paradox. The moment your intervention succeeds, the timeline shifts. Your parents never meet, you are never born, yet here you stand, a living contradiction, a being whose own actions have eliminated the very possibility of their existence. This is no mere theoretical puzzle, but a profound challenge to our most fundamental understanding of causality and existence. If you were never born, you could not have traveled back to prevent your birth. Yet if you didn't prevent your birth, then you would exist, allowing you to make the journey after all, creating an impossible circle of causation with no beginning and no resolution. Some theorists suggest that such an action would create a branching timeline, that the moment you arrive in the past, you split reality into two distinct paths. In one, you continue to exist as a visitor from a timeline that now only persists in your memories. The other unfolds without you ever having been born. But this merely sidesteps the paradox rather than resolving it, for you remain a living artifact from a reality that no longer has causal connection to the world around you. Others propose that the universe might enforce a kind of chronological protection conjecture, that the laws of physics themselves would somehow prevent you from changing events in ways that create such paradoxes. Perhaps your every attempt to prevent your parents' meeting would be thwarted by seemingly random circumstances, the universe conspiring to preserve its own causal integrity. More unsettling still is the possibility that success in your mission would trigger your immediate dissolution. Would you simply vanish the moment the new timeline solidified? Would you feel yourself unraveling, your memories and consciousness fading like morning mist as the causal foundations of your existence evaporated? Or would you continue, somehow detached from time's normal flow, a living paradox, observing a world where you could never have been born? This temporal riddle shares profound connections with questions of identity and persistence. Are you truly the same person from moment to moment, or merely a continuity of consciousness that could, theoretically, survive the erasure of its own causal history? If your past were undone but your present consciousness remained, would you still be you? Consider also how this paradox reflects our deeper existential questions. Each of us exists because of an incalculable chain of events stretching back through generations, each link as necessary as it was improbable. Change any one of countless variables, and you would never have come to be. Yet here you are, contemplating the fragility of the causal web that brought you into existence. The time traveler's gamble forces us to question whether time is truly linear, or whether it might be more accurately understood as a vast, multidimensional landscape where all possibilities coexist simultaneously. Perhaps when we speak of changing the past, we are merely shifting our consciousness between already existing realities, each one as real and complete as what we call the present. Some quantum physicists suggest that the paradox might be resolved through quantum mechanics, where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. Perhaps consciousness itself operates similarly when confronted with temporal paradoxes, existing in superposition across multiple possible timelines until reality resolves into one coherent story. As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider that perhaps the most profound aspect of the time traveler's gamble is not the logical contradiction it presents, but what it reveals about the nature of existence itself. Every moment you experience depends upon an infinite regression of prior causes, each one essential to your being here, now, considering these very thoughts. What if our linear perception of time is merely a convenient illusion, a simplification that allows us to function in a reality far more complex and interconnected than our minds can comfortably grasp? What if past, present, and future exist simultaneously in a magnificent eternal now, and causality itself is merely the way our limited consciousness interprets the unfolding of this grander reality? As you close your eyes, let one final question linger. What if the true paradox is not that time travel might erase your existence, but that your existence itself, this precise configuration of consciousness, memory, and awareness, emerged from the chaotic flow of time at all? Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how we might vanish from the timeline, but how we came to be here in the first place, gazing back at our origins and forward into possibilities not yet realized. In the gentle darkness of night, let these temporal enigmas drift through your mind like stars across the cosmic void. Beautiful, distant, and infinitely mysterious. The paradox of free will. If every decision you make is caused by past events, is it truly a choice? What if the sense of agency you feel in every moment, that profound feeling that you are the author of your own actions, is merely an illusion crafted by your mind? What if every choice you believe you make freely has already been determined by an unbroken chain of causes stretching back to the beginning of time itself? Tonight, we drift into one of philosophy's most enduring enigmas, the paradox of free will. This ancient puzzle asks whether our decisions are truly our own, or merely the inevitable outcome of prior causes. Our genetics, our upbringing, our experiences, and the immutable laws of physics that govern every particle in our being. Imagine yourself standing at a crossroads, contemplating which path to take. You weigh your options, consider your desires, and ultimately choose one direction over another. This choice feels intensely personal, a pure expression of your will. Yet every aspect of that decision, your preferences, your reasoning, your emotional responses, emerges from the particular configuration of your brain, shaped by forces beyond your control. The paradox deepens when we consider the nature of causality itself. If we trace backward from any decision you make, whether to sip tea or coffee, to speak or remain silent, to love or to leave, we find an unbroken sequence of causes. Your preference for tea might stem from childhood memories, genetic predispositions to certain flavors, or cultural influences. Those influences themselves have prior causes, and those causes have causes of their own, creating an infinite regression that extends beyond your birth, beyond human history, perhaps to the very formation of the universe. If the present state of the cosmos is the inevitable result of its previous state, and that state the result of the one before it, where in this causal chain does choice enter? How can we reconcile our profound sense of freedom with a universe that appears to operate through unbroken deterministic processes? Some philosophers suggest that free will and determinism might coexist, that your choices can be both caused by prior events and meaningfully your own. Perhaps freedom isn't the absence of causation, but rather a particular kind of causation, one where your desires, values, and reasoning process form an essential link in the causal chain. Your choice is determined, yes, but determined by who you are. And is that not a kind of freedom? Others propose that quantum indeterminacy, the fundamental randomness observed at subatomic levels, might create space for free will in the gaps of determinism. Yet this raises another troubling question. If your choices are influenced by random quantum fluctuations rather than deterministic processes, are they any more freely yours? Is freedom found in randomness, or merely another kind of bondage? Consider how this paradox ripples through our understanding of moral responsibility. If your actions are the inevitable outcome of causes beyond your control, can you truly be held accountable for them? The criminal's violence, the saint's compassion, the artist's creation, are these truly choices deserving of blame or praise, or merely the necessary unfolding of causal sequences set in motion long before their authors were born? Yet despite the philosophical arguments for determinism, our lived experience stubbornly insists upon our agency. Each day, you navigate countless decisions with the unshakable feeling that you are choosing freely. This phenomenological sense of freedom feels more immediately true than any abstract argument against it. Perhaps consciousness itself evolved precisely to create this sense of agency, this feeling of authoring our actions, regardless of whether metaphysical freedom truly exists. The paradox of free will shares profound connections with questions of selfhood and identity. If your choices are determined by who you are, but who you are was determined by factors beyond your control, what part of you can claim authorship of your actions? Where is the self that chooses, if the choosing self was itself unchosen? Some Eastern philosophical traditions suggest a different approach altogether, proposing that the very notion of a separate self making independent choices is the fundamental illusion. Perhaps there is no paradox when we recognize that there is no separate chooser apart from the vast interdependent web of causality that constitutes reality itself. Modern neuroscience adds another layer to this ancient puzzle. Brain imaging studies reveal that our neurons begin the process of initiating actions before we become consciously aware of our intention to act. This suggests that perhaps our conscious sense of choosing is not the cause of our actions, but rather a post hoc narrative, a story we tell ourselves after neural processes have already set events in motion. As you sink deeper into contemplation, consider that perhaps the paradox itself reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness. What if our sense of freedom exists precisely at the boundary between deterministic causality and our awareness of it? What if free will emerges not despite causal determination, but through our conscious engagement with it, our ability to reflect upon our desires, to imagine alternative possibilities, and to participate knowingly in the unfolding of our lives? Perhaps freedom is not found in breaking the causal chain, but in becoming conscious of our place within it, in the mysterious capacity to witness our own determination and, in witnessing, to somehow participate in it. Not freedom from causality, but freedom within it. As the gentle darkness of night surrounds you, let this final question linger in your mind. What if the true nature of free will isn't about whether your choices are determined, but about how you relate to the unfolding of your life, whether with resistance or acceptance, with unconscious reaction or conscious response, with blind automaticity or mindful presence? In this moment, as you contemplate whether your contemplation itself is freely chosen, perhaps you touch the very heart of the paradox, where the determined and the chooser become indistinguishable, where the observer and the observed merge into the singular mystery of conscious existence. The grand illusion. Is reality just a construct of your mind, and if so, whose mind created your mind? What if the world you perceive, every color, sound, texture, and taste, exists only within the theater of your consciousness? What if the seemingly solid reality around you is merely a construction of your mind, a sophisticated interpretation of signals that bear little resemblance to what might exist beyond your perception? Tonight, we drift into perhaps the most profound enigma of consciousness, the grand illusion. This ancient mystery asks whether reality exists independently of our minds, or if our experience is merely a subjective construction with no guarantee of reflecting any objective truth. Imagine yourself sitting in a garden. You perceive the crimson hue of roses, feel the gentle caress of a breeze, hear birds calling in the distance. Yet science tells us that colors don't exist in the external world, only wavelengths of light. Sound is merely vibrating air, and touch is the interpretation of molecular interactions. Every quality that makes your experience rich and meaningful exists not in the world, but in the mysterious alchemy of your consciousness, transforming physical signals into subjective experience. The boundary between you and the world begins to dissolve when we consider that everything you have ever known, every person, place, memory, and thought, has only ever been experienced within your mind. You have never directly encountered the world out there, only your brain's reconstruction of it. Even your body and the sense of occupying space are themselves mental constructs, interpretations of neural signals that create the compelling illusion of having a location in a physical world. This raises a disquieting question. If reality as you know it exists only in your mind, what evidence could possibly convince you that anything exists beyond it? How can you step outside your consciousness to verify that your perceptions correspond to something real, when the very act of verification must itself occur within the confines of your subjective experience? Some philosophers suggest that the external world must exist because our perceptions seem consistent and ordered, not chaotic and random as we might expect of pure hallucination. Yet this reasoning itself occurs within mind, making it a peculiar kind of circular logic, using the apparent coherence of experience to validate the reality of what creates that experience. The paradox deepens when we consider the nature of mind itself. If your consciousness constructs reality, what constructs consciousness? If your mind is the creator of your experienced world, what created your mind? Each potential answer, whether evolutionary, theological, or metaphysical, eventually encounters the same regression, for any explanation must itself be conceived and understood through the very consciousness we are attempting to explain. Eastern philosophical traditions often suggest that the separation between mind and world is itself the fundamental illusion. Perhaps there is no division between the perceiver and the perceived, no mind separate from reality, no reality separate from mind. What we call mind and world might be two aspects of a single unified process, artificially divided by our conceptual thinking. Consider how this paradox transforms our understanding of shared reality. When you and another person look at the same rose, you assume you're experiencing the same flower. Yet each of you constructs your experience independently, based on different neural architectures, different histories, different associations. Are you truly sharing reality, or merely creating parallel subjective worlds that approximately align? Modern neuroscience adds fascinating dimensions to this ancient puzzle. Studies of consciousness reveal that our brains don't passively record reality, but actively construct it, filtering an overwhelming flood of sensory data through expectations, beliefs, and prior experiences. What you perceive is not what is, but what your brain predicts should be there. A controlled hallucination constrained by sensory input. Reality, in this view, is your mind's best guess about the causes of its sensory signals. The implications extend to the very foundation of knowledge. If everything we can know must be filtered through our consciousness, how can we ever claim to know reality as it truly is? Even our most advanced scientific instruments ultimately report their findings to human minds, leaving us forever trapped within the circle of our perception, unable to step outside and see the truth unmediated by our cognitive structures. As you sink deeper into contemplation, consider that perhaps the question itself contains a hidden assumption, that there must be a clear division between mind and reality, perceiver and perceived. What if consciousness is not something that happens within you, but something that you happen within? What if awareness is not a product of the brain, but a fundamental aspect of reality itself, expressing through countless forms, including the form you now experience as you? Perhaps the most profound possibility is that consciousness is not creating reality, nor is reality creating consciousness. Rather, both emerge together as inseparable aspects of a deeper process that transcends our conceptual categories, neither purely mental nor purely physical, but something more fundamental that our dualistic thinking cannot fully grasp. As the gentle darkness of night surrounds you, let this final question linger. What if the true nature of reality is neither objective nor subjective, but intersubjective, created not by your mind alone, but through the vast, intricate dance of all conscious beings collectively dreaming the world into being? What if we are not passive observers of reality, nor solitary creators of our experience, but active participants in a grand, collaborative act of ongoing creation? In this moment of quiet reflection, perhaps you touch the very edge of the mystery, where the questioner and the question, the knower and the known, dissolve into the singular, limitless ocean of consciousness from which all experience arises and to which all experience returns. the identity paradox. If every cell in your body is replaced every 7 years, are you still the same person? What if the physical foundation of your existence is in constant flux, your body continuously dismantling and rebuilding itself until nothing material remains from the person you once were? If the cells that composed your childhood self have long since been replaced, what thread of continuity connects you to that distant version of yourself? Tonight, we explore the haunting riddle of personal identity, the identity paradox. This ancient puzzle invites us to question whether we remain the same person throughout our lives, despite the complete renewal of our physical substance. Imagine the cells of your body as tiny lights, gradually blinking out and reigniting in slightly different positions. Science tells us that your body undergoes a remarkable process of renewal. Your skin replaces itself every few weeks. Your liver regenerates in months. Even your skeleton reconstructs itself over a decade. Though the common belief that every cell regenerates within 7 years is an oversimplification, the underlying truth remains. The physical material that constitutes you today is almost entirely different from what formed your body years ago. This biological reality creates a profound paradox. If you're composed of entirely different matter than your childhood self, what justifies the claim that you are the same person? When you recall memories from years past, are you remembering experiences that happened to you or to someone who has since physically vanished, leaving behind only echoes in your consciousness? Consider the ancient thought experiment of Theseus's ship. If sailors replace each plank of a wooden vessel one by one until no original material remains, is it still the same ship? Similarly, if every cell in your body has been replaced, are you still the same person? The question becomes even more perplexing when we consider that this cellular turnover happens gradually, with no clear moment of transformation, no threshold where you suddenly become someone else. Some philosophers suggest that personal identity might reside in psychological continuity rather than physical substance. Perhaps you remain the same person because your memories, beliefs, and character traits create an unbroken chain of mental states connecting your past to your present. Each version of you flows seamlessly into the next, preserving a core identity despite physical transformation. Yet this psychological solution encounters its own paradoxes. Your memories themselves change over time. Some fade, while others transform subtly with each recollection. Your beliefs and values evolve, sometimes dramatically. The passionate convictions of your youth may seem foreign to your older self. If psychological continuity grounds identity, but your psychology itself undergoes profound changes, what remains constant? The paradox deepens when we consider how consciousness experiences this ever-changing reality. You perceive yourself as continuous and unified, despite overwhelming evidence that you are a process rather than a fixed entity. Each night, consciousness dissolves into sleep, yet you awaken with the unshakable conviction that you are the same person who closed your eyes hours before. This felt sense of continuity persists, despite the ceaseless flux of your physical and mental states. Eastern philosophical traditions often approach this paradox differently, suggesting that our attachment to a fixed, enduring self might be the fundamental illusion. Perhaps there is no permanent you that persists through time, only a flowing stream of experiences, thoughts, and sensations that we mistakenly consolidate into an imagined fixed identity. In this view, the paradox dissolves when we recognize that personal identity is not something to be preserved, but rather a concept to be transcended. Modern neuroscience offers yet another perspective. Your brain maintains certain patterns of neural connectivity, even as individual neurons are replaced. Perhaps identity resides not in the physical substance of your brain, but in these persistent patterns, the relationships between components, rather than the components themselves. Like a river that maintains its form, while its waters continuously flow and replace themselves, your identity might persist through the preservation of certain dynamic patterns despite material change. The implications extend beyond philosophical curiosity. If you are not the same person you were in the past, what meaning does responsibility hold? Can you meaningfully be held accountable for actions performed by a physically different version of yourself? Can you rightfully claim achievements from years past, or feel genuine connection to old photographs of you composed of entirely different matter? As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider that perhaps identity is neither fixed nor entirely fluid, but exists in the delicate balance between continuity and change. What if the very concept of same person contains a hidden assumption that identity must be an all or nothing proposition? Perhaps you are both the same and not the same as your past self, simultaneously continuous and discontinuous across time in ways that transcend simple categorization. What if personal identity is not something you possess, but something you create, a narrative you continuously weave to connect disparate moments into a coherent story of selfhood? Perhaps the thread that binds your many physical incarnations is neither material nor purely psychological, but narrative in nature, the ongoing story you tell yourself about who you are and have been. As the gentle darkness of night embraces you, let this final question linger in your mind. What if the paradox itself reveals something profound about the nature of existence? That we are not fixed entities moving through time, but temporal processes unfolding through each moment. Perhaps you are less like an object and more like a symphony, existing not as a static thing, but as a pattern extended through time, never complete in any single moment, but realized only through the entire duration of your becoming. In this moment of quiet reflection, perhaps you touch something both unsettling and liberating, the recognition that you are not merely changing, but change itself, forever flowing, yet somehow miraculously coherent, like a river that remembers its own course as it continuously transforms into something new. The Sorites Paradox, the paradox of the heap. If you remove one grain of sand from a heap at a time, at what point is it no longer a heap? What if the boundaries between concepts we consider fundamental, between abundance and scarcity, between presence and absence, between significance and insignificance, are not sharp lines, but hazy gradients with no definable edge? What if the categories through which we understand reality dissolve upon close inspection, revealing a world more fluid and indeterminate than our language suggests? Tonight, we explore an ancient puzzle that challenges our deepest assumptions about how we categorize the world, the Sorites Paradox, from the Greek word soros, meaning heap. This deceptively simple riddle asks us to consider when a collection of individual grains becomes a heap, and when, as grains are removed one by one, it ceases to be one. Imagine a golden pyramid of sand before you, thousands of grains glistening in the light. Undoubtedly, you would call this a heap. Now imagine removing a single grain. The collection remains a heap, for surely one grain cannot make the difference between what is and is not a heap. Remove another grain and another. Each time, the same principle applies. The removal of just one grain cannot transform what is a heap into what is not a heap. Yet if we continue this process long enough, eventually we'll reach a point where only a few grains remain, perhaps just one, or none at all. Surely, a single grain of sand is not a heap. But where in this gradual progression did the transformation occur? If no single grain's removal can change a heap into a non-heap, how do we arrive at a non-heap through this process of gradual reduction? This paradox extends far beyond sand. It applies to any vague concept defined by degree rather than by precise boundaries. When does a person with gradually thinning hair become bald? How many trees make a forest? How many houses constitute a city? At what precise moment does a tadpole become a frog, a child become an adult, or dusk become night? Some philosophers suggest that the paradox reveals a fundamental mismatch between language and reality. Perhaps our words, heap, bald, forest, city, create artificial boundaries where nature offers only continuous spectrums. We impose discrete categories on a world that exists in gradients, and the paradox emerges from this tension between linguistic precision and natural continuity. Others propose that vague terms might have precise meanings after all, but ones that remain forever unknowable to us. Perhaps there is a specific number of grains that constitutes a heap, say, exactly 327. But this number is not determined by definition or convention, but by some hidden fact we cannot access. This solution, called epistemicism, suggests the boundaries are sharp, but permanently beyond our knowledge. The paradox deepens when we consider its implications for how we make sense of our experiences. If we cannot precisely define when a collection of grains becomes a heap, how can we trust our categorization of more complex and consequential concepts? Where exactly does poverty begin? At what point does a political system become tyrannical? When does justifiable concern become harmful anxiety? Ancient Greek philosophers recognized that this puzzle threatens not just particular concepts, but potentially the very foundations of logical reasoning. The principle of non-contradiction, that something cannot both be and not be at the same time, seems challenged by borderline cases where an entity appears to both belong and not belong to a category simultaneously. The paradox also connects to profound questions about identity and change. The ancient philosopher Heraclitus observed that one cannot step into the same river twice, for both the river and the person are constantly changing. Like the heap that transforms imperceptibly with each grain removed, we ourselves exist in continuous flux. At what point do gradual changes in your body, memories, and beliefs make you a different person than you once were? Modern mathematics offers interesting perspectives through fuzzy logic and degree theories, which allow for partial membership in categories. Perhaps something can be a heap to a certain degree, 90% a heap or 30% a heap, rather than simply being a heap or not a heap. This approach embraces the vagueness rather than trying to eliminate it, suggesting that borderline cases are not failures of our concepts, but accurate reflections of reality's inherent indeterminacy. As you sink deeper into contemplation, consider that perhaps the paradox reveals something profound about consciousness itself. Your awareness does not experience the world in binary categories, but in rich, nuanced spectrums of sensation and meaning. Perhaps vagueness is not a flaw in our thinking, but a necessary feature of minds that must navigate a world of infinite gradation with finite cognitive resources. What if the boundaries we perceive are neither in the world itself nor merely in our minds, but emerge from the interaction between consciousness and reality? Perhaps heaps exist neither objectively nor subjectively, but intersubjectively, in the space where perception meets the perceived, where mind touches world. As the gentle darkness of night surrounds you, let this final question linger. What if the search for precise definitions is itself misguided, an attempt to impose artificial clarity on a reality that is inherently indeterminate? What if wisdom lies not in resolving the paradox, but in embracing it, in learning to live gracefully within a world where boundaries blur, categories overlap, and certainty gives way to the humble recognition that some questions have no definite answers? In this moment of quiet reflection, perhaps you touch the very nature of reality, not as a collection of sharply defined objects and categories, but as a flowing continuum where everything connects to everything else, where distinctions arise and dissolve like patterns in sand, ever-changing yet somehow coherent in the eternal dance of becoming. The paradox of Theseus's ship. What if identity isn't fixed but fluid, flowing through time like water between your fingers? What if the very essence of something, or someone, can never truly be captured, only glimpsed in passing moments, before it transforms once again? Tonight, we explore paradoxes that challenge our understanding of identity, permanence, and the nature of reality itself. These aren't merely philosophical puzzles, but windows into the deeper mysteries that surround us each day as we navigate the ever-shifting currents of existence. Imagine a wooden ship, ancient and weathered, its planks darkened by centuries at sea. This is the ship of Theseus, legendary hero of Athens, preserved through generations as a monument to his greatness. But time shows no reverence for legends. As the years pass, the ship begins to decay, a plank here, a beam there, each piece carefully removed and replaced with new, identical wood. The restoration continues until, eventually, not a single original piece remains. Every plank, every nail, every rope has been exchanged for a perfect replica. The question emerges from the mist, like a phantom ship on the horizon. Is this still the ship of Theseus? The ship appears identical. It occupies the same harbour, bears the same name, serves the same purpose. To the casual observer, nothing has changed. But somewhere in the exchange of matter, has something essential been lost? Has the identity of the ship slipped away with the original wood? Or does it persist in the form, the function, the continuous history that binds old and new together? Perhaps identity resides not in physical substance, but in pattern and purpose, in the arrangement of parts rather than the parts themselves. After all, our own bodies replace their cells continuously, yet we remain ourselves throughout. The river flows ever onward, never containing the same water twice, yet we still give it a name and recognize it as one thing. But what if we venture deeper into this paradox? Imagine now that someone has collected all the discarded original pieces of Theseus's ship. With patience and skill, they reassemble these weathered fragments until a second ship emerges, identical in design to the first, but composed entirely of the original materials. Now, two ships float in the harbour, where once there was one. Both claim the identity of Theseus's ship, one through continuous existence, the other through original substance. Which, if either, is the true ship of Theseus? Perhaps both ships have equal claim to the identity. Perhaps neither does. Or perhaps identity itself is not singular, but plural. Not an absolute, but a spectrum, with each ship embodying different aspects of what it means to be the same. This paradox ripples outward, touching everything we believe about permanence in an impermanent world. It whispers to us about our own existence, how we too are constantly replacing our physical selves while maintaining a sense of continuous identity. Are you the same person you were a decade ago? Will you be the same person tomorrow? Consider the mind that contemplates its own existence. Memories fade and transform. Beliefs evolve. Perspectives shift with experience. If your thoughts are not the same, if your feelings have changed, if your very understanding of self has transformed, what remains that can be called you? Maybe identity exists, not as a fixed point, but as a story we tell ourselves, a narrative that creates continuity from change, unity from multiplicity. The ship of Theseus remains itself, not because its matter persists, but because we continue to recognize it as such, to weave it into our cultural memory, to preserve its place in our collective understanding. Or perhaps the paradox itself is the illusion, born from our need to categorize and define what is fundamentally indefinable. What if there is no absolute answer to the question of sameness? What if identity exists not as a binary, same or different, but as a constantly shifting relationship between past and present, form and substance, perception and reality? As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider this. The paradox of Theseus's ship is not merely about an ancient vessel, but about everything that changes while remaining recognizable, relationships that evolve yet endure, traditions that adapt yet persist, and your own self, renewed with each passing moment, yet somehow continuous through time. What if the most profound truth is that nothing stays the same and nothing completely changes? What if identity itself is a paradox, both permanent and ephemeral, both broken and whole? What if we are all ships of Theseus, sailing through time, simultaneously remaining and becoming? The questions linger like stars reflected on dark water, inviting not resolution, but contemplation. For perhaps it is not in finding answers that wisdom lies, but in learning to live gracefully with the questions themselves, allowing paradox to expand our understanding rather than confine it. As consciousness gently loosens its hold, remember that you too are both the ship and the sea, both the fixed point and the flowing current. And in that impossible harmony of opposites, perhaps the true nature of existence reveals itself, if only for a moment, before transforming once again. The egg paradox. If a chicken is born from an egg, but the egg is laid by a chicken, which came first? What if origins aren't singular moments but endless cycles, spinning through time like celestial bodies in an infinite dance? What if beginnings and endings are merely illusions, artificial boundaries we place on the continuous flow of existence? Tonight, we drift into the depths of a paradox that has whispered through human consciousness for millennia. A question so deceptively simple that children ask it, yet so profound that philosophers still ponder its implications. The chicken and the egg, locked in an eternal circle of causality that challenges our very understanding of time and creation. Imagine an egg, smooth and perfect in its oval simplicity. Within its fragile calcium walls lies the potential for life, a creature fully formed yet unborn, waiting to emerge. The egg cracks, and from it steps a chicken, blinking in the new light of existence. This chicken grows, matures, and eventually lays another egg, continuing the cycle that stretches backward and forward through time like an infinite mirror. The question emerges from this cycle, soft but insistent. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? If we say the chicken came first, we must explain how this chicken came to be without having first been an embryo within an egg. If we say the egg came first, we must account for how this egg was created without having been laid by a chicken. Each answer seems to require the existence of the very thing it precedes. Perhaps the paradox lies not in the question itself, but in our linear conception of time and causality. We imagine a straight line with a definite starting point, a first cause from which all else flows. But what if reality is more circular than linear? What if causes and effects flow into one another like water in a stream, with no clear beginning or end? Consider the ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent consuming its own tail. It represents the cyclical nature of existence, where endings become beginnings and creation emerges from destruction. Perhaps the chicken and the egg exist in such a relationship, each simultaneously the creator and the created, the cause and the effect. Or perhaps we should look deeper, beyond the apparent contradiction. From the perspective of evolution, the answer reveals itself not as a choice between two options, but as a gradual transformation. The first chicken egg was laid by a creature that was almost, but not quite, a chicken, the product of countless generations of subtle genetic variations. And the first chicken hatched from an egg laid by its almost chicken ancestor. In this view, there was never a definitive first chicken or first egg, but rather a continuous spectrum of becoming, each generation shifting imperceptibly toward what we now recognize as a chicken. The boundary between not chicken and chicken exists only in our minds, not in the unbroken chain of life. But this evolutionary perspective doesn't completely dissolve the paradox, it merely shifts it. For we still must ask, at what precise moment did a not quite chicken egg become a chicken egg? When did the transformation occur? Was it when the genetic material was formed, when the egg was laid, or when the creature within developed characteristics we would recognize as chicken? The more we examine the question, the more it fragments into deeper questions about identity, categorization, and the nature of change itself. What makes a chicken a chicken? Is it its DNA, its appearance, its behavior? And who are we to draw these boundaries around the flowing river of life? Maybe the paradox persists because it touches something fundamental about existence, the mysterious interplay between continuity and change that defines all life. We are drawn to seek beginnings, to find the original source, the prime mover. Yet perhaps there are no absolute beginnings, only transformations, matter and energy eternally rearranging themselves into new patterns. As you drift toward the edge of consciousness, consider this. What if the question, which came first, is itself a kind of dream, a product of our limited perception? What if, from a higher vantage point, the chicken and the egg are not separate entities, but different manifestations of the same flowing reality, like water that becomes vapor and then rain, never beginning or ending, but eternally changing form? The chicken and the egg paradox invites us to step outside our habitual thinking, to glimpse a reality more cyclical than linear, more interconnected than separate. It whispers to us about the limits of language and logic when faced with the mysteries of existence. And perhaps that is the true gift of paradoxes, not that they offer answers, but that they create spaces where certainty dissolves and wonder flows in. In that state of not knowing, of comfortable uncertainty, we may discover a deeper truth than any definitive answer could provide. As sleep approaches, release the need for resolution. Allow the chicken and the egg to exist in perfect, impossible simultaneity, each the creator of the other, each the beginning that has no beginning. And in that paradoxical space, perhaps you'll find not confusion but peace, the quiet acceptance that some questions are not meant to be answered, but to be lived. The mirror paradox. You can see yourself in a mirror, but your reflection doesn't actually exist. So which one is real? What if reality isn't solid but spectral, a dance between substance and illusion that plays across the boundaries of perception? What if the line between what exists and what appears to exist is more permeable than we dare imagine? Tonight, we gaze into one of the most intimate paradoxes we encounter daily, one that silently questions the nature of our very existence each time we look into its depths. The mirror and its reflection, a window into another world that somehow contains us, yet doesn't contain us at all. Imagine standing before a mirror in the soft glow of morning light. You raise your hand, the figure in the mirror raises theirs. You smile, they smile in perfect synchrony. The reflection moves as you move, exists as you exist, appears indistinguishable from you in almost every way. Yet it has no substance, no mass, no independent existence beyond the play of light upon a silvered surface. The question emerges from this silvery depth, rippling outward. What exactly are you seeing when you look into a mirror? Is it truly you, or merely an illusion of you? And if the reflection isn't real, if it exists only as patterns of light and shadow, what does that suggest about our understanding of reality itself? The physics of reflection tells us that what we see in mirrors isn't material, but optical. Photons bouncing off our bodies, striking the reflective surface, and returning to our eyes in perfect geometric precision. The image appears to exist behind the mirror, in a space that isn't actually there. Your reflection seems to stand 3 feet beyond the mirror's surface, in a room that perfectly mirrors your own. Yet that space, that room, that version of you, has no physical reality. Yet this non-existent reflection can be photographed. It can be observed by multiple people simultaneously. It affects us emotionally. We adjust our appearance based on what we see, feel confidence or doubt in response to it, recognize ourselves through it. How can something unreal exert such power over what is real? Perhaps the mirror paradox invites us to reconsider what we mean by real in the first place. Is reality defined solely by physical substance, by atoms and molecules arranged in space? Or might reality encompass patterns, relationships, and information that exist independently of their material substrate? Consider that when you see anything, a tree, a star, another person, you are not perceiving the object itself, but light that has interacted with that object. Your experience of the world is always mediated, always at one remove from the things themselves. In this sense, everything you perceive shares something with the mirror's reflection. It comes to you as patterns of energy interpreted by your consciousness. The boundary between reality and appearance begins to blur. If your reflection isn't real because it lacks physical substance, what about digital photographs of you? What about your image on a video call, transmitted across thousands of miles? What about your presence in the memories of others? None of these manifestations have physical substance, yet each captures something essential about you, something we intuitively recognize as real. Perhaps reality extends beyond the material into the informational, into patterns that can be transferred from one medium to another without losing their essential nature. Your reflection may lack substance, but it preserves the pattern that is you, your proportions, movements, expressions, with perfect fidelity. In preserving this pattern, might it preserve something fundamentally real about you? The mirror paradox deepens when we consider consciousness itself. You recognize the reflection as you, yet you know it isn't you. This recognition requires a kind of split awareness, the ability to simultaneously identify with and differentiate yourself from your image. The mirror creates a loop of self-reference that has shaped human consciousness since we first glimpsed ourselves in still water. Some philosophers suggest that this capacity for self-reflection, this ability to see ourselves as both subject and object, is what distinguishes human consciousness. The mirror doesn't just reflect light, it reflects awareness back upon itself, creating the conditions for self-knowledge. In this sense, the unreal reflection has helped create what we experience as our real selves. As sleep approaches and your thoughts begin to drift, consider this. What if both you and your reflection are equally real and equally illusory? What if physical existence and perceptual existence are simply different modes of reality, each valid in its own domain? The atoms that form your body are mostly empty space, vibrating in patterns that physics struggles to fully explain. The solid you is itself a kind of persistent illusion, matter that appears solid only because of how we perceive it. Meanwhile, your reflection, though lacking physical substance, exists as patterns of light that can be consistently observed, predicted, and interacted with. It has causal effects on the world through how it influences your perception and behavior. It persists in time, changes in predictable ways, and follows the laws of physics as reliably as any material object. Perhaps the true nature of reality lies not in choosing between substance and appearance, but in recognizing their inseparable dance, how each gives rise to and depends upon the other. The mirror shows us not just our external form, but the paradoxical nature of existence itself, simultaneously material and immaterial, persistent yet constantly changing, singular yet infinitely reflected. As consciousness gently recedes, Let yourself exist in the space between, neither entirely solid nor entirely spectral, but a conscious pattern flowing through time, simultaneously perceiving and being perceived, real and reflected, singular and multiple. In that paradoxical space, perhaps you'll glimpse not just your reflection, but the mysterious nature of consciousness itself, the ultimate mirror in which reality both exists and doesn't exist, depending on how the light falls. Zeno's arrow. Paradox. If time is made of infinite tiny moments, how does an arrow ever reach its target? What if motion itself is an illusion, a trick of perception that conceals a deeper stillness beneath the flowing surface of reality? What if the continuous journey from here to there is actually composed of infinite motionless instants, frozen like photographs stacked against one another to create the illusion of movement? Tonight, we float into the ancient paradox of Zeno's arrow, a puzzle that has pierced the very heart of our understanding of time, space, and motion for over 2,000 years. In its flight, this philosophical arrow doesn't merely travel through space, but through the deepest questions of existence itself. Imagine an archer drawing back their bow, fingers tensed against the taut string. The arrow is released, cutting through the air toward its distant target. To our eyes, the movement appears smooth and continuous, a single flowing journey from bow to bullseye. But is this what truly happens? Or does our perception conceal a more fragmented reality? The Greek philosopher Zeno proposed a troubling thought. If time can be divided into infinitely small moments, instants so brief they have no duration, then in each of these instants, the arrow must occupy a single, fixed position. It must be perfectly still, if only for that infinitesimal moment. But if the arrow is motionless in each instant, and time consists entirely of such instants, how does the arrow ever move at all? How can stillness, no matter how many times you multiply it, create motion? The question emerges, suspended in mid-flight. Is movement itself impossible? Or is there something fundamentally flawed in how we conceive of time and space? Perhaps the paradox reveals a limitation not in reality, but in our thinking about reality. We attempt to break continuous processes into discrete fragments, to divide the indivisible flow of experience into separate moments. But what if motion is fundamentally continuous, resisting our attempts to slice it into static frames? What if the arrow's flight exists as a single unified event that cannot be reduced to a series of frozen positions? Consider how a film creates the illusion of movement. Each frame captures a motionless image, yet when projected in rapid succession, these static images transform into flowing motion. Is reality similar? A series of discrete moments that blend together in our perception? Or is the comparison backward? Is it our thinking that fragments the continuous flow of reality into artificial instants? Modern physics offers its own perspective on Zeno's paradox. Quantum mechanics suggests that reality at its most fundamental level is probabilistic rather than deterministic, that particles exist not as points in space, but as waves of probability. The arrow, at the quantum level, doesn't follow a single definite path, but exists as a superposition of many potential positions until observed. Perhaps motion itself is not a series of positions, but a continuous field of possibilities collapsing into actuality moment by moment. Meanwhile, calculus, a mathematical framework developed centuries after Zeno, provides tools for handling the infinite divisions that troubled the ancient philosopher. Through the concepts of limits and infinitesimals, mathematicians found ways to work with continuous change and motion, showing how infinitely many infinitesimal distances can indeed sum to a finite journey. Yet these solutions, profound as they are, don't entirely dispel the mystery at the heart of the paradox. They tell us how to calculate and predict motion, but not what motion fundamentally is. The question persists: how does reality bridge the gap between stillness and movement, between discrete moments and continuous flow? Perhaps the paradox points toward a deeper truth, that time itself isn't what we think it is. We imagine time as a series of moments strung like beads on a linear thread, proceeding from past to future. But what if this conception is merely a construct of our minds, a way of organizing experience rather than a fundamental feature of reality? Some physicists suggest that time may not flow at all, that past, present, and future may exist simultaneously in what they call a block universe. In this view, the arrow doesn't move through time. Rather, the arrow exists in different positions at different points in space-time, all of which are equally real. What we experience as motion might be our consciousness moving along this four-dimensional structure, like a spotlight illuminating different sections of an already complete film. As your thoughts begin to drift towards sleep, consider this. What if Zeno's paradox isn't a problem to be solved, but a window through which we glimpse the limitations of human perception and conception? What if the universe is both continuous and discrete, both flowing and still, depending on how we observe it, just as light can behave as both wave and particle? The arrow's flight challenges us to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously, to embrace paradox not as confusion, but as an invitation to deeper understanding. Perhaps it's in the space between opposing concepts, between stillness and motion, instant and duration, part and whole, that the true nature of reality resides. As consciousness gentles toward dreams, imagine yourself as both the archer and the arrow, both the one who initiates motion and the one in motion, both discrete and continuous, both dividing time and flowing with it. In that paradoxical state of being, you might discover that the greatest journeys aren't about resolving contradictions, but about transcending them, finding rest in movement and movement in rest, as the arrow of awareness flies toward targets not yet imagined, through a darkness alive with infinite possibility. The Quantum Immortality Paradox. If every possible quantum event spawns a new universe, are you technically immortal in at least one of them? What if death itself is merely a door that closes in one universe while remaining open in countless others? What if the end we fear is not an absolute terminus, but simply a branching path, one that your consciousness continues to follow in some distant corner of an infinite multiverse? Tonight, we drift into one of the most haunting implications of quantum physics, a thought experiment that blurs the boundaries between life and death, between ending and continuation. The Quantum Immortality Paradox doesn't just question how we die, but whether we truly can, from the perspective of our own subjective experience. Imagine a scientist sitting in a sealed room with a peculiar device, a quantum mechanism connected to a deadly weapon. The device measures the spin of a subatomic particle, which quantum mechanics tells us exists in a superposition of states until observed. If the particle is measured as spinning up, the weapon remains inactive. If it's measured as down, the weapon fires, instantly killing the scientist. According to quantum mechanics, each time this experiment runs, the universe splits into two branches, one where the scientist lives and one where they die. But here emerges the paradox. The scientist can only experience the branches where they survive. They can never experience their own death. From their subjective viewpoint, they will always, against incredible odds, find the particle spinning up, time after time, experiment after experiment. The question emerges like a ghost from the quantum foam. Does this mean that, from your own perspective, you are immortal? Will your consciousness always find itself flowing down those branches of reality where you somehow continue to exist, no matter how improbable those paths become? The mathematics of the many worlds interpretation suggests a universe constantly branching into infinite parallel realities, each one containing a slightly different version of you, facing slightly different circumstances. Most branches may lead to your demise, but your subjective experience can only follow those where your consciousness persists. You would experience a kind of quantum natural selection, always finding yourself in the universes where you happen to survive. Perhaps this explains why you have survived every deadly risk you've ever faced, every illness, accident, or close call. Was it merely luck, or were you unconsciously sliding along the branches of reality where your existence continues, while countless other versions of you met their end in parallel worlds? Consider for a moment what this would mean if true. Your subjective timeline might become increasingly unlikely as you age. While most versions of you would succumb to time and entropy, your consciousness would keep experiencing increasingly rare survival scenarios. Perhaps you would witness miraculous recoveries from terminal illnesses, or survive accidents that should have been fatal. Your reality might become progressively more improbable, more miraculous, as your timeline follows the vanishingly narrow path of continued existence. But this leads to troubling questions. If quantum immortality were true, what would this extended existence eventually feel like? Would you experience the gradual deterioration of your body and mind, trapped in a state of permanent decline, yet never reaching the final release of death? Would you become an unlikely Methuselah, watching generations pass while you remain, a cosmic anomaly sustained by quantum chance? Perhaps the paradox has flaws in its reasoning. Critics argue that consciousness might not be binary, not simply on or off, but might fade gradually as the brain's functions diminish. If consciousness exists on a spectrum rather than as a discrete phenomenon, there may be no clear branching point where it either continues or ceases. The borders between life and death, awareness and oblivion, might be more permeable than the paradox assumes. Others suggest that quantum effects typically don't manifest at the macro scale of human bodies and brain functions. While subatomic particles may exist in superpositions, these quantum behaviors generally don't translate to larger systems due to a process called decoherence. Our bodies interact with countless particles in our environment, rapidly collapsing quantum possibilities into classical certainties. Yet the paradox persists in the borderlands between physics and philosophy, challenging our understanding of what it means to exist, to perceive, to continue. It whispers a possibility both comforting and disturbing. That subjective experience might be immortal, even if physical bodies are not. As your consciousness begins to drift toward the shores of sleep, consider this. What if each night's dreams are glimpses into these parallel branches of reality? What if, in the loosened state between wakefulness and sleep, your awareness briefly touches the lives of other versions of you, versions that made different choices, followed different paths, survived different fates? Perhaps in the infinite tapestry of the multiverse, every possible version of your life is being played out simultaneously, each one as real as the one you currently experience. Perhaps death is not an ending, but a cosmic viewpoint shift, consciousness continuing to experience only those realities where it remains viable, like water flowing around obstacles in its path. The quantum immortality paradox offers no certainties, only possibilities that expand with each question we ask. It reminds us that the nature of consciousness remains perhaps the greatest mystery in existence, a question mark at the center of all our scientific understanding. As you move closer to the border of sleep, imagine your consciousness not as a single point moving through time, but as a wave spreading across infinite possibilities, experiencing not one life, but all possible lives, not one moment, but all possible moments. In that vast ocean of potential existence, perhaps we find not just immortality, but infinity, a continuation that transcends our limited understanding of life and death, beginning and end. And in that boundless realm of quantum possibility, perhaps you are already dreaming, already continuing, already immortal in ways that the waking mind can barely comprehend. The observer effect paradox. The act of observing something changes it. So does reality exist independently of your mind? What if the world you perceive isn't simply waiting to be discovered, but is partially created through the very act of perception? What if the boundary between observer and observed is not a wall, but a doorway, a permeable membrane through which consciousness and reality flow into one another, each forever altering the other? Tonight, we venture into one of the most profound mysteries uncovered by quantum physics, a paradox that challenges our deepest assumptions about objectivity and suggests that the universe may be fundamentally intertwined with the minds that behold it. The observer effect doesn't merely question what we know about reality, it questions whether reality can exist at all without being known. Imagine a particle, invisible to the naked eye, smaller than light itself, drifting through the quantum realm. According to the mathematics of quantum mechanics, this particle exists not as a definite object in a definite location, but as a cloud of probability, a smeared landscape of potential positions and states. It is everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously embodying contradictory properties, hovering in a ghostly superposition that defies our classical intuitions. But something remarkable happens when we attempt to observe this particle. The act of measurement, the mere introduction of consciousness into the system, causes this probability cloud to collapse into a single definite state. The particle suddenly assumes a specific position, a specific momentum, as if reality crystallizes from possibility only when witnessed. The question emerges from this quantum haze, both precise and boundless. If reality is different when observed than when unobserved, can we say that reality exists independently of observation? Or does consciousness somehow participate in the creation of the very reality it perceives? The implications ripple outward, touching everything from the smallest subatomic scales to the vast architecture of existence itself. If your observation affects quantum particles, and these particles constitute everything, from the stars in distant galaxies to the neurons firing in your brain, then perhaps the entire universe exists in dialogue with consciousness, neither entirely objective nor entirely subjective, but somewhere in the mysterious territory between. Consider the famous double-slit experiment, where particles behave as waves when not observed, creating an interference pattern, but behave as particles when measured, following distinct trajectories. It's as if the particles somehow know when they're being watched and adjust their fundamental nature accordingly. The experimental apparatus hasn't changed, the physical laws haven't changed, only the presence or absence of observation has changed, yet reality itself transforms in response. Some physicists suggest this doesn't imply consciousness directly affects reality, but rather that measurement necessarily interacts with quantum systems, disrupting their delicate superpositions. In this view, it's not mind that collapses quantum possibilities, but the physical interaction required for any measurement. Yet this explanation doesn't entirely dissolve the mystery, for it still suggests a reality that refuses to be pinned down, that exists differently when interacted with than when left alone. Others, like physicist John Wheeler, proposed the participatory universe theory, suggesting that observers are not passive witnesses, but active participants in reality's unfolding. In his delayed choice experiments, even decisions made after a particle has supposedly chosen its path seem to retroactively determine which path it took. Past, present, and future entangle in ways that challenge our linear understanding of causality. Perhaps the observer effect reveals a universe more holistic than our fragmented perceptions suggest. A reality where everything is connected in ways that transcend conventional boundaries of space, time, and identity. What if subject and object, observer and observed, mind and matter are not fundamental opposites, but different expressions of the same underlying wholeness? Eastern philosophical traditions have long suggested that consciousness and reality are not separate. The ancient Vedic concept of neti-neti, not this, not that, points to a reality beyond dualities, neither purely objective nor purely subjective, but transcending both categories. Similarly, Buddhist teachings on emptiness suggest that all phenomena lack inherent, independent existence and emerge only through mutual interdependence. As your thoughts drift toward the threshold of dreams, consider this. What if reality is neither entirely out there nor entirely in here, but emerges precisely at the meeting point between world and awareness? What if the universe is less like a machine running according to predetermined rules and more like a conversation, a dynamic, evolving dialogue between consciousness and potentiality? Perhaps when you close your eyes tonight, the world doesn't simply continue unchanged in your absence. Perhaps it dissolves back into a symphony of possibilities, waiting for consciousness to once again bring definition to its fluid contours. And perhaps when you awaken tomorrow, you are not merely observing a pre-existing reality, but participating in its ongoing creation, your perception collaborating with infinite potential to manifest this particular version of existence from countless alternatives. The observer effect paradox offers no final answers, only deepening questions that spiral toward the heart of being itself. It suggests that consciousness may not be merely an accidental byproduct of material processes, but an intrinsic aspect of reality, perhaps even the canvas upon which the universe paints itself into existence. As consciousness gently withdraws towards sleep, allow yourself to rest in the mystery rather than straining for certainty. Feel the boundaries between inner and outer reality softening, like shorelines blurred by rising tide. In that liminal space between waking and dreaming, between observing and being, perhaps you'll glimpse a truth beyond paradox, a reality neither created nor discovered, but continually co-created through the ancient, ongoing dance between consciousness and cosmos. The brain in a jar paradox. If your brain were removed and placed in a simulation, how would you ever know? What if the reality you experience, the cool touch of wind against your skin, the vivid colors of sunset, the voice of someone you love, is not what it appears to be? What if these sensations are not connections to an external world, but merely electrical signals fed into a disembodied brain suspended in nutrient fluid, connected to a vast and sophisticated simulation. Tonight, we slip into one of philosophy's most unsettling thought experiments, a paradox that questions the very foundation of what we know and how we know it. The brain in a jar doesn't merely ask what reality is. It asks how we could ever be certain of reality's nature when our only window to the world is through our senses. Senses that could, theoretically, be perfectly deceived. Imagine a scenario where advanced neuroscientists have removed your brain from your body and placed it in a life-sustaining vessel. They've connected every sensory neuron to an elaborate computer system capable of generating signals identical to those your brain would receive from actual sensory organs. This computer simulates an entire world, perhaps one exactly like the world you believe you currently inhabit, down to the smallest detail. In this scenario, you would continue to experience a seemingly normal life. You would feel hunger and satisfaction, witness beauty and ugliness, form relationships and navigate conflicts, all while floating in a laboratory, every experience manufactured by algorithms and electrical impulses. Your memories of life before the procedure could also be simulated, leaving you with no reference point to distinguish between what was real and what was programmed. The question emerges from this unsettling thought experiment, rippling through consciousness. How could you possibly know whether your current experience is genuine interaction with an external reality, or merely an elaborate simulation fed directly into your brain? The paradox deepens when we realize that even in normal circumstances, our experience of reality is already mediated. Your brain never directly contacts the outside world. It receives only electrochemical signals from your sensory organs, which it then interprets into the subjective experience of reality. You don't actually see light. You experience your brain's interpretation of signals from photoreceptors in your retina. You don't actually feel texture. You experience your brain's interpretation of signals from mechanoreceptors in your skin. In a fundamental sense, we all experience reality indirectly, through the translation and interpretation of neural signals. If these signals could be perfectly replicated by a simulation, the distinction between real experience and simulated experience might disappear entirely from the subjective perspective. Philosophers have grappled with this problem for centuries, long before modern neuroscience made the scenario technologically conceivable. René Descartes wondered if an evil demon might be deceiving him about all his sensory experiences. Later, philosophers imagined perfect hallucinations indistinguishable from reality. Today, some theorists propose that our universe itself might be a sophisticated simulation created by beings in a higher-order reality, the simulation hypothesis that suggests we might all be living in a cosmic version of an immersive computer program. Some philosophers respond to the brain-in-a-jar scenario by arguing that while perfect deception might be possible, it's irrational to seriously doubt reality without specific evidence suggesting deception. Others, like Hilary Putnam, argue that the very meaning of our concepts depends on causal connections to the external world. If you were a brain in a jar, your concept of jar wouldn't actually refer to real jars, creating a semantic contradiction that supposedly dissolves the paradox. Yet these responses don't entirely dispel the unsettling implication that our certainty about external reality rests on assumptions we cannot verify without circular reasoning. We trust our senses because they seem reliable, but we judge their reliability using those same senses. Perhaps the paradox points toward a deeper truth, that the sharp distinction we draw between objective reality and subjective experience might be more fluid than we imagine. What if reality isn't something entirely separate from experience, but something that emerges precisely at the intersection of consciousness and world? What if the question isn't whether the world exists independently of mind, but how mind and world co-create each other in every moment of perception? As your consciousness begins to loosen its hold on wakefulness, consider this. What if the brain-in-a-jar scenario isn't merely a philosophical puzzle, but an invitation to question the nature of experience itself? What if, regardless of whether your brain is in a skull or a jar, the mystery of consciousness, of how any physical system, biological or technological, could give rise to subjective experience, remains equally profound? Perhaps what matters isn't whether the tree you remember from childhood was real or simulated, but how it shaped your understanding of beauty, growth, and time. Perhaps what gives meaning to your relationships isn't whether the people you love exist as independent biological entities, or as exquisitely rendered simulations, but the authenticity of the connections you form with them, the genuine care, understanding, and presence that flows between consciousnesses, however they might be embodied. As sleep approaches, allow the paradox to dissolve the rigid boundaries between certainty and doubt, between knowing and questioning. Perhaps absolute verification of external reality is impossible. Perhaps we all live in a perpetual state of faith, trusting that our experiences connect us to something beyond ourselves without being able to step outside our own consciousness to confirm it. In that space of not knowing, of humble recognition that our understanding is always partial, always mediated, there is a curious freedom. If you cannot know with absolute certainty whether you are a fully embodied human or a brain in a jar, then perhaps the distinction loses its sting. Perhaps what remains is simply the invitation to engage fully with experience as it presents itself, to find meaning and connection within the reality you inhabit, whatever its ultimate nature might be. As consciousness gently recedes, imagine yourself suspended between certainty and doubt, between material and virtual, between knowing and wondering, neither resisting the mystery nor demanding its resolution, but resting in the paradoxical space where questions become not problems to solve, but doorways opening onto ever-expanding wonder. The Omniscience Paradox. If you knew everything that would ever happen, could you still change your future? What if knowledge itself could become a prison? Imagine drifting through a world where every moment, every choice, every heartbeat has already been mapped in your mind, a tapestry of time already woven before you've even lived it. Tonight, we explore the haunting whispers of the Omniscience Paradox, where perfect knowledge and free will dance in impossible contradiction. This isn't merely a philosophical puzzle. It's an invitation to question the very nature of choice, time, and destiny. Picture a being who knows with absolute certainty every event that will unfold across the entirety of time. Every decision you'll make, every word you'll speak, every thought that will cross your mind, all perfectly foreseen. Now consider, if this being truly knows your future with certainty, could they choose to act differently than what they've foreseen? The question lingers like a mist that refuses to dissipate. If this omniscient being attempts to defy their foreknowledge by making a different choice, then their original knowledge was flawed. They didn't truly know what would happen. Yet if they cannot defy their foreknowledge, then it seems they lack the freedom to choose differently. Their actions are locked into a predetermined path, making their knowledge a gilded cage. This paradox doesn't merely challenge theological concepts. It invites us to contemplate the relationship between knowledge and freedom in our own lives. Does knowing the outcome of our choices diminish our ability to choose freely? If every decision is influenced by what we already know, was it ever truly a choice at all? Perhaps omniscience is more nuanced than we first imagined. Some philosophers suggest that perfect knowledge doesn't necessarily eliminate freedom. It may simply exist alongside it in ways our finite minds struggle to comprehend. Perhaps an omniscient being doesn't experience time as a linear progression, but perceives all moments simultaneously, existing in an eternal now, where past, present, and future are indistinguishable. In this view, the paradox emerges not from any inherent contradiction between knowledge and freedom, but from our limited perspective of time. The omniscient being doesn't predict the future. They witness it, as we might observe a landscape from a mountaintop, seeing all paths at once without diminishing the reality that each path is freely chosen. As we drift deeper into contemplation, we might wonder whether true omniscience includes not just knowledge of what will happen, but knowledge of all possibilities, every potential choice, every alternate timeline, every path not taken. Perhaps omniscience encompasses not a single determined future, but an infinite array of possible futures that collapse into reality only when choice brings them into being. Yet even this understanding raises questions that ripple outward. If an omniscient being knows every possible future, do they also know which one will actually occur? And if so, are we back where we started, trapped in the same paradox of predetermined knowledge? The paradox takes on new dimensions when we consider human consciousness. If you somehow gained perfect knowledge of your entire future, every choice, every consequence, every joy and sorrow, would you still experience that future as a series of choices? Or would your foreknowledge transform experience itself, making each moment not a point of decision, but merely the unfolding of what you already knew would happen. Consider the ancient Greek myth of Cassandra, blessed with perfect prophetic vision, yet cursed that no one would believe her predictions. Her tragedy wasn't just that others dismissed her knowledge, but that her knowledge itself became a form of suffering, seeing disasters approach with no power to avert them. Is perfect knowledge without the power to change what is known a blessing or a burden? Perhaps what we're truly confronting is the limitation of binary thinking, the assumption that either we have free will or we don't, that either the future is determined or it isn't. What if reality exists in quantum states rather than absolute certainties, where knowledge and freedom coexist in ways that transcend simple contradiction? Some theologians have suggested that divine omniscience might be understood not as knowing what will happen, but knowing what would happen given any possible choice or circumstance. In this view, an omniscient being wouldn't know the future as a fixed sequence of events, but as an infinitely branching tree of possibilities, each branch perfectly understood, but none predetermined until choice brings it into being. Consider how this paradox mirrors the smaller contradictions we navigate daily, moments when awareness of our own patterns seems to both illuminate and constrain our choices. The more deeply we understand ourselves, the more clearly we see our habitual responses, yet this very awareness opens the possibility of choosing differently. Is self-knowledge a limitation or the beginning of true freedom? Modern physics offers its own perspective on this ancient paradox. Quantum mechanics suggests a universe of probabilities rather than certainties, where observation itself plays a role in determining what becomes real. What if omniscience itself operates not by fixing the future, but by comprehending all possible quantum states simultaneously? Perhaps perfect knowledge doesn't eliminate possibility, but embraces it in its entirety. What if the greatest truth isn't found in resolving the paradox, but in dwelling within it? Perhaps perfect knowledge doesn't eliminate mystery, but deepens it, revealing layers of complexity that invite not certainty, but wonder. Just as light can behave as both particle and wave, perhaps knowledge and freedom are not opposites, but complementary aspects of a reality more complex than our either-or categories can contain. As your consciousness begins to drift towards sleep, let this question remain. Is freedom found not in escaping knowledge, but in embracing it fully, allowing it to transform how we understand choice itself? And what mysteries await in the space where knowing and choosing become not opponents, but partners in an eternal dance? What if omniscience isn't the enemy of possibility, but its greatest expression, the ability to hold all potential futures in mind without diminishing the significance of the choices that bring one possibility into being? Perhaps the paradox dissolves not when we choose between knowledge and freedom, but when we recognize that each enriches rather than negates the other. As your mind floats between wakefulness and dreams, consider that perhaps the universe itself exists in this same liminal space, neither entirely determined nor entirely random, but a living tapestry where pattern and possibility interweave, where knowing and becoming flow into each other like rivers meeting the sea. Sleep now, carrying this paradox not as a problem to be solved, but as a doorway opening onto vistas of contemplation that extend beyond the boundaries of conventional thought. A gentle invitation to dream of worlds where perfect knowledge and perfect freedom might, against all logic, coexist in harmony. The twin paradox. If one twin travels at near light speed and returns, why is one older than the other? What if time itself isn't the steady river we perceive, but a flowing stream that moves at different rates depending on how you travel through it? Imagine drifting through existence and discovering that the most fundamental aspect of reality, the passage of time, is merely an illusion of perspective. Tonight, we explore one of physics' most fascinating enigmas, the twin paradox, a thought experiment that doesn't just challenge our understanding of time, but invites us to question whether our perception of reality is nothing more than a beautiful, persistent dream. Picture two identical twins, standing together on Earth, their heartbeats synchronized, their lives unfolding in perfect parallel. Now imagine one twin embarks on a journey aboard a spacecraft traveling at nearly the speed of light, while the other remains behind. When the traveling twin eventually returns home, something impossible seems to have occurred. They find their earthbound sibling has aged significantly more. Two lives that began in synchrony have become desynchronized, as if they've been living in different temporal realities. How can this be? If all motion is relative, as Einstein taught us, couldn't we just as easily say that the earthbound twin was the one moving away from the traveling twin? Shouldn't both twins experience the other as aging more slowly? The question hangs suspended like stars in the void, neither settling nor dispersing. This isn't merely a theoretical puzzle, but a gateway to understanding the malleable fabric of spacetime itself. What we perceive as paradoxical is actually the profound reality that time is not absolute, but relative, flowing differently depending on your velocity and gravitational environment. The key to unraveling this apparent contradiction lies in understanding that the traveling twin's journey doesn't maintain a single inertial reference frame. Unlike the earthbound twin, who remains in essentially one frame of reference, the space traveler must accelerate to approach light speed, then decelerate, change direction, and accelerate again to return home. These changes in velocity create an asymmetry that resolves the seeming paradox. As we drift deeper into contemplation, consider how time dilation has been confirmed not just in thought experiments, but in measurable reality. Atomic clocks placed on high-speed aircraft return slightly behind their earthbound counterparts. Even GPS satellites must adjust for time flowing fractionally faster in orbit than on Earth's surface. What seems like abstract theory manifests in the practical technology guiding you home each day. Perhaps more haunting is the realization that if you were to observe someone falling into a black hole, you would see them appear to slow down, eventually freezing in time at the event horizon, while from their perspective, they would cross this boundary in an instant. Two experiences of the same reality, both valid, yet seemingly irreconcilable, like dreams that cannot acknowledge each other. This paradox transforms our understanding of existence itself. If time can flow at different rates, then perhaps the universe is not a single narrative, but an infinite collection of timelines, each valid from its own reference frame. What appears sequential from one perspective might exist simultaneously from another. Perhaps past, present, and future coexist as a four-dimensional reality that we experience only in three-dimensional slices, like a being confined to a plane trying to comprehend a cube. Consider how this scientific truth echoes through human experience. Haven't you noticed how time seems to move differently depending on your state of mind? Moments of joy pass in a blink, while seconds of anticipation stretch into eternity. Could these subjective experiences be hinting at a deeper truth about time's malleable nature? The twin paradox reminds us that even seemingly contradictory perspectives can be harmonized within a more comprehensive understanding. What if other paradoxes in our lives, moments where truth seems to contradict itself, are similarly waiting for a shift in perspective that reveals a deeper coherence? As we navigate this thought experiment, we discover that the cosmos operates according to principles that defy our intuitive understanding. The universe does not conform to our expectations. Rather, our minds must expand to embrace the strange reality in which we find ourselves. Time, that most intimate and universal experience, reveals itself to be neither constant nor absolute, but a dynamic relationship between objects in motion through space-time. What other aspects of reality might similarly transform under closer examination? If time itself is not what it appears, what else might we discover when we look beyond the limitations of human perception? Perhaps color exists differently for other species, or consciousness manifests in forms we cannot yet recognize. The twin paradox doesn't just challenge our understanding of physics, it invites us to question the very nature of perception itself. If two observers can witness the same event and perceive its timing differently, both correctly from their reference frames, then perhaps objective reality is not a single, unified narrative, but a complex tapestry of interwoven perspectives. As your consciousness begins to drift towards sleep, let this question remain. What if the greatest truths are found not in choosing between seemingly contradictory perspectives, but in developing the capacity to hold multiple viewpoints simultaneously? Perhaps wisdom lies not in resolving paradoxes, but in allowing them to expand our understanding beyond the boundaries of conventional thought. What if our perception of a steady, universal flow of time is merely a necessary illusion that allows our consciousness to function in a reality far more complex than our evolved senses can directly perceive? Perhaps in dreams, freed from the constraints of waking perception, we glimpse hints of this more fluid reality, where time breathes and bends like a living thing. As your mind floats between wakefulness and sleep, consider that perhaps you are both twins in this cosmic story, simultaneously the traveler and the one who remains. Both perspectives exist within you, the self that moves through time at the pace of human experience, and the self that observes from somewhere beyond, watching the beautiful pattern of your life unfold across the canvas of space-time. Sleep now, carrying this paradox not as a contradiction to be resolved, but as a doorway opening onto vistas where physics and poetry meet, where the mathematics of relativity reveals a universe more dreamlike, more wonderfully strange than we could have imagined. The Grandfather Paradox. If you go back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, how were you born to time travel? What if the past is not merely memory, but a realm we might someday visit? Imagine drifting through the corridors of time itself, where moments long gone still exist, waiting to be experienced once more. Yet within this dream of temporal exploration lies a nightmare of logic, a paradox that challenges our very understanding of causality. Tonight we explore the haunting whispers of the Grandfather Paradox, where cause and effect spiral into an impossible loop. This isn't merely a philosophical puzzle. It's an invitation to question whether time is a river flowing in one direction or an ocean where all moments exist simultaneously. Picture yourself stepping through a portal into the past, specifically to a time before your grandparents met. Now imagine interfering with their fateful encounter, perhaps distracting your grandfather at the crucial moment he would have met your grandmother. The question emerges like mist from still waters. If you prevent their meeting, your parent would never be born, and consequently, neither would you. Yet if you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time to prevent your grandparents' meeting? The question circles endlessly, a snake consuming its own tail. If you succeed in preventing your own existence, then you could not have existed to travel back and interfere. Yet if you never interfered, then your grandparents would have met, leading to your eventual birth and your fateful journey back in time. We find ourselves caught in a logical impossibility, a paradox that seems to suggest time travel into the past cannot exist, or that reality is stranger than we have imagined. This paradox doesn't merely challenge science fiction. It invites us to contemplate the very nature of time, causality, and the structure of our universe. Does this contradiction prove that traveling to the past is fundamentally impossible? Or does it hint at more exotic possibilities, parallel timelines, multiple universes, or a cosmos that somehow accommodates these apparent contradictions? Perhaps the resolution lies in understanding time differently than our intuitions suggest. Some physicists propose that traveling to the past might automatically create a new timeline or parallel universe, distinct from your original reality. In this view, you wouldn't be changing your own past, but creating a branching alternative history, one where your grandparents never meet and a version of you never exists. Meanwhile, the original timeline that produced you remains intact, preserving the causality that brought you into existence. As we drift deeper into contemplation, consider quantum mechanics' strange implications for this paradox. At the quantum level, particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed, a phenomenon called superposition. What if time itself operates with similar quantum properties? Perhaps past events aren't fixed, but exist in a superposition of possibilities until they interact with a time traveler, at which point reality resolves into a single consistent history. This leads to the Novikov self-consistency principle, which suggests that any attempt to create a paradox would somehow be prevented by the laws of physics. Events would conspire to maintain consistency. Perhaps your attempt to distract your grandfather fails in some unexpected way, or the person you prevent him from meeting turns out not to be your grandmother after all. The universe, in this view, is like a self-healing story that cannot tolerate contradictions. Yet even these resolutions raise questions that ripple outward. If multiple timelines exist, what determines which one we experience? If paradoxes cannot occur, does this mean we lack true free will when visiting the past? And if time operates with quantum properties, can we ever truly understand it through our macroscopic, linear experience? The paradox transforms when we consider that perhaps time is not fundamental at all, but emergent, a human perception arising from deeper physical processes. Some theoretical physicists suggest that at the most fundamental level, all moments exist simultaneously in a block universe where past, present, and future are merely different coordinates in a four-dimensional space-time. In this view, our sense of time flowing is an illusion arising from our limited perspective, like a character in a book who experiences the story page by page, unaware that all pages exist concurrently. Consider how this paradox mirrors our everyday experience of regret and hypothetical thinking. Haven't you wondered how your life might have unfolded differently if you had made different choices at crucial moments? Each what if creates a mental simulation, a kind of internal time travel where we imagine alternate histories that never came to be. Perhaps the grandfather paradox fascinates us precisely because it externalizes this deeply human experience of contemplating roads not taken. What if the greatest truth isn't found in resolving the paradox, but in recognizing that our linear understanding of causality is merely a useful approximation of a reality far more complex? Perhaps time is neither a line nor a circle, but something our three-dimensional minds cannot fully visualize, a hyperdimensional structure where cause and effect interweave in patterns beyond our comprehension. As your consciousness begins to drift towards sleep, let this question remain. What if paradoxes are not flaws in our understanding, but doorways to deeper truths? Perhaps they mark the boundaries where our everyday logic reaches its limits, inviting us to expand our conception of what's possible. What if time protects itself not by preventing travel to the past, but by accommodating all possible variations and contradictions within a larger structure, a cosmic library containing every possible version of history, including those where you both exist and don't exist, where you both travel back and never travel at all? As your mind floats between wakefulness and dreams, consider that perhaps you already time travel in a sense, through memory, which returns you to the past, through anticipation, which sends you to imagined futures, and through dreams themselves, where time often flows by different rules altogether. Sleep now, carrying this paradox not as a problem to be solved, but as a key that might someday unlock doors to understanding reality in ways we cannot yet imagine, where contradiction itself becomes not an obstacle, but a path to deeper comprehension of the mysterious cosmos in which we find ourselves. The Predestination Paradox. If you time travel and cause an event that led you to time travel, was it ever a choice? What if your every action, every decision, every moment of supposed free will was actually predetermined, not by fate or destiny, but by your own future self? Imagine drifting through a world where causality flows not in a straight line, but in perfect circles, where effects become their own causes in an endless loop of cosmic irony. Tonight, we explore the mesmerizing spiral of the Predestination Paradox, where choice and inevitability become indistinguishable. This isn't merely a theoretical puzzle, it's an invitation to question whether free will itself might be an elegant illusion, a story we tell ourselves while dancing to the choreography of time's closed circles. Picture a time traveler who journeys to the past and, through their actions, unwittingly creates the very circumstances that will eventually lead their younger self to build a time machine and embark on that same journey. The scientist who travels back to give her younger self the inspiration for time travel. The mysterious stranger who saves a child's life, only to discover that child grows up to become his own father. The question emerges like a phantom. In these closed causal loops, was anything ever truly chosen, or was every action predetermined by its own consequences? If you travel back and become the catalyst for your own journey, then your journey was always going to happen. It had to happen for the past version of yourself to be influenced. Yet if it was always destined to occur, did you ever really choose to travel through time at all? The question circles endlessly, a perfect loop with no beginning and no end. This paradox doesn't merely challenge our science fiction, it invites us to contemplate the very nature of causality, determinism, and our most cherished belief in free will. If causes can be created by their own effects, then the entire framework of how we understand time and choice begins to dissolve like morning mist. Perhaps the resolution lies in understanding time as something more complex than our linear experience suggests. Some philosophers propose that free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive, that choices can be both freely made and inevitable. In this view, the time traveler both chooses to make the journey and fulfills a destiny that was always woven into the fabric of space-time. The circle is both drawn and discovered simultaneously. As we drift deeper into contemplation, consider how quantum mechanics offers its own perspective on this paradox. At the quantum level, particles exist in states of probability until measured, neither here nor there until observed. What if choices exist similarly, as fields of probability that collapse into determined events only when experienced? Perhaps the time traveler's journey exists in a superposition of possibilities until the moment of decision, at which point past and future align to create a consistent history. This leads to the haunting concept of eternal recurrence, the idea that in a closed temporal loop, events don't happen just once, but infinitely, cycling through the same sequence forever. The time traveler doesn't make the journey once, but countless times, each iteration identical to the last, like a cosmic film reel playing on endless repeat. Is such an existence a prison of repetition, or is there freedom in the perfect harmony of a completed circle? Yet even these resolutions raise questions that ripple outward. If causality can form closed loops, what initiated the loop in the first place? Can something truly be its own cause, or does this merely hide a deeper mystery? And if our choices are both free and predetermined, is this a meaningful form of freedom or a philosophical sleight of hand? The paradox transforms when we consider that perhaps our entire conception of cause preceding effect is merely a product of how our consciousness experiences time. What if, at a deeper level, events don't cause one another sequentially, but exist in relations of dependence within a timeless whole? In this view, the time traveler doesn't cause the past or the future, but participates in a complete pattern that encompasses all moments simultaneously. Consider how this paradox mirrors our everyday experience of how our past and future selves influence each other. Haven't you made decisions based on who you want to become, even as who you can become is shaped by decisions you've already made? Each choice emerges from your history while simultaneously creating your destiny, a miniature version of the time traveler's loop playing out in ordinary life. Ancient philosophies from Eastern traditions to Stoicism have suggested that freedom might be found not in the ability to have done otherwise, but in the alignment of one's will with what is necessary. Perhaps the time traveler achieves a perfect form of this freedom, choosing exactly what was always going to happen, not as a victim of fate, but as its willing participant. What if the greatest truth isn't found in breaking the loop, but in recognizing our place within it? Perhaps wisdom lies not in escaping determination, but in embracing the perfect coherence of a life where past and future form a complete whole. Like a great work of art, where every element is necessary, perhaps a life constrained by its own future is not diminished, but perfected. As your consciousness begins to drift towards sleep, let this question remain. What if freedom isn't found in the power to disrupt causality, but in the conscious participation in patterns larger than ourselves? Perhaps the distinction between choosing and fulfilling destiny is merely another illusion of perspective, dissolving when viewed from outside time's flow. What if predestination and choice are not opposites, but complements, like two sides of a Mobius strip that appears to have opposing faces, yet forms a single continuous surface? Perhaps the time traveler's journey represents the perfect reconciliation of these apparent contradictions, a choice that creates its own necessity, a destiny freely embraced. As your mind floats between wakefulness and dreams, consider that perhaps your own life contains such beautiful paradoxes, moments where what you must do and what you would choose align perfectly, where constraint and freedom become indistinguishable. In such moments, are you following a predetermined path or expressing your deepest nature? Perhaps the question itself creates a false dichotomy. Sleep now, carrying this paradox not as a problem to be solved, but as a koan that invites contemplation beyond the boundaries of conventional thought. A gentle reminder that reality may be more harmonious, more elegantly interconnected, more beautifully circular than our linear minds can fully comprehend. The self-creation paradox. What if someone time travels and becomes their own ancestor? What if your very existence is a loop with no beginning? Imagine drifting through the strange possibility that you are, in some impossible way, your own ancestor, that your genetic code and the very essence of your being originated not from an external source, but from yourself. A perfect circle of creation where you are both the creator and the created. Tonight, we explore perhaps the most unsettling temporal enigma of all, the self-creation paradox. This isn't merely a fascinating thought experiment. It's an invitation to question the fundamental nature of existence itself and whether anything can truly exist without an origin point. Picture a time traveler who journeys to the distant past, falls in love, and through the natural course of life, has a child. This child grows up, has children of their own, and these descendants continue for generations until, eventually, one of them becomes the very time traveler who first made the journey back. The question emerges like a whisper in a silent room. If you are your own great-great-grandparent, where did you ultimately come from? The paradox forms a perfect causal loop with no external origin, a snake not merely eating its tail, but somehow giving birth to itself. If your genetic code comes from yourself, passed down through generations only to return to its source, then you are a self-contained system of creation, an entity that somehow bootstrapped itself into existence without any external cause. Yet how can something be its own origin? The question circles endlessly, challenging our most basic understanding of causality and existence. This paradox doesn't merely challenge our science fiction. It invites us to contemplate the deepest mysteries of ontology, the philosophical study of being. Can something truly exist without an external cause? If so, what might this tell us about the nature of the universe itself? Perhaps the resolution lies in understanding genetic inheritance as more complex than our intuition suggests. Over generations, genetic material recombines and mutates, influenced by countless other ancestors. If you became your own distant ancestor, you would contribute only a fraction of your own genetic code, diluted through time. In this view, you don't fully create yourself, but participate in your own creation alongside countless others, a partial loop rather than a perfect circle. As we drift deeper into contemplation, consider the metaphysical implications of such a loop. Objects and beings with no external origin challenge our understanding of creation itself. If something can exist without being created by something else, might this offer insight into the ultimate cosmic question? Why is there something rather than nothing? Perhaps the universe itself is a kind of self-creating system, existing in a causal loop that transcends our linear understanding of time. This leads to the concept of ontological paradox, where an object or information exists without ever being created. Imagine traveling back in time with a book, then giving that book to its original author before they've written it. The author then copies the book and publishes it, eventually leading to the copy you bring back in time. The question haunts us: who actually wrote the book? The information within it seems to exist in a perfect loop, without creative origin. Yet even these resolutions raise questions that ripple outward. If causality can form such closed loops, does anything truly require an external creator? Could consciousness itself be such a self-creating system? And if our very existence can bootstrap itself into being, what does this tell us about the nature of reality? The paradox transforms when we consider the concept of information and pattern rather than physical substance. Perhaps what travels through the loop is not matter itself, but pattern and information, the template for your existence passing through time like a wave, maintaining continuity despite the constant replacement of physical particles. In this view, you don't create your physical substance, but perpetuate the pattern that defines you through the generations. Consider how this paradox mirrors the ancient philosophical question of the self. The atoms that composed you as a child have been almost entirely replaced throughout your life, yet you maintain a sense of continuous identity. If your physical substance is constantly changing, what persists? Perhaps the self is more like a story that continues even as its medium changes, a pattern that maintains integrity through transformation. Some physicists suggest that in a four-dimensional block universe view of spacetime, all moments exist simultaneously, and causality is merely a relationship between events rather than a process unfolding in time. In this view, the self-creation loop doesn't evolve or develop. It simply exists as a complete, consistent structure within the fabric of reality. The paradox dissolves not because it's resolved, but because it's reframed as a peculiar but stable pattern in the tapestry of spacetime. What if the greatest truth isn't found in seeking the origin of such loops, but in recognizing that certain aspects of reality might exist as complete systems unto themselves? Perhaps some things simply are, without having become. Like a perfect circle, they have no beginning or end, not because they are incomplete, but because they are perfectly whole. As your consciousness begins to drift towards sleep, let this question remain. What if existence itself isn't a linear progression from cause to effect, but a complex web where some threads loop back upon themselves? Perhaps the universe contains not just things that were created, but things that simply exist, eternally present, like mathematical truths that weren't invented but discovered. What if the self-creation paradox isn't a logical impossibility, but a glimpse into a deeper reality where our conventional distinctions between creator and created, cause and effect, beginning and end, dissolve into a more fundamental unity? Perhaps there are aspects of existence that cannot be traced to external origins because they are, in some profound sense, self-sustaining patterns in the cosmos. As your mind floats between wakefulness and dreams, consider that perhaps consciousness itself has something of this self-referential quality, aware of itself, created by its own processes, a miracle of self-organization that emerges without external design. In the depths of your own awareness, do you find a beginning, or merely the present moment cognizant of itself? Sleep now, carrying this paradox not as a problem to be solved, but as a koan that points toward mysteries beyond our conventional frameworks of understanding. A gentle reminder that reality may be more self-sustaining, more self-creating, more perfectly complete in itself than our cause-seeking minds can fully comprehend. The information paradox. If black holes destroy information, does that mean the past can be erased? What if there exist cosmic entities so powerful they can permanently erase parts of reality itself? What if the fundamental laws that govern our universe contain within them a loophole, a means by which information, once written into the fabric of existence, can be irrevocably destroyed? Tonight, we venture into one of physics' most profound mysteries, the information paradox. This modern enigma asks whether black holes, those gravitational leviathans that devour light itself, might also destroy information, undermining a principle that many physicists consider sacrosanct, that information can never truly be lost. Imagine a journal falling into a black hole. The pages contain handwritten notes, arrangements of ink molecules encoding thoughts, memories, data. As the journal crosses the event horizon, it begins an inexorable journey toward the singularity at the black hole's heart. According to Einstein's general relativity, the journal will be crushed beyond recognition, its matter compressed to infinite density, its very structure obliterated. Yet quantum mechanics tells us a different story about information. In the quantum realm, information about particles, their position, momentum, spin, is preserved in all interactions. When particles transform or combine, their quantum states evolve according to precise mathematical rules that theoretically allow the past to be reconstructed from the present. This principle suggests that information is never truly destroyed, merely transformed, sometimes beyond practical recognition, but always preserved within the universe's ledger. The paradox emerges in the collision between these two fundamental theories. If black holes destroy information as general relativity suggests, then quantum mechanics' principle of information conservation is violated. Conversely, if information must be preserved as quantum theory demands, then our understanding of black holes must be incomplete or incorrect. The stakes of this paradox extend far beyond theoretical physics. If information can truly be destroyed, then parts of the past might be erased in a cosmic sense, not merely forgotten, but rendered retroactively non-existent, as if they had never been. The implications ripple through our understanding of causality, determinism, and the very nature of time itself. In the 1970s, physicist Stephen Hawking deepened the mystery when he discovered that black holes aren't entirely black. They emit a faint radiation now bearing his name. As black holes radiate, they gradually lose mass and eventually evaporate completely. But this radiation appeared to be purely thermal, carrying no information about what had fallen in. If a black hole eventually disappears, seemingly taking with it all information about what it had consumed, where does that information go? Some theorists propose that information might be preserved in subtle quantum correlations within Hawking radiation, encoded in patterns too complex for us to currently detect or decipher. Others suggest that information might be stored in holographic form on the black hole's event horizon, never actually entering the singularity. Still others explore more exotic possibilities, such as information escaping into other universes or dimensions. The paradox connects to profound questions about the fundamental nature of reality. If information is truly conserved, as many physicists believe, then the universe possesses a kind of perfect memory. Every event that has ever occurred remains encoded somewhere in the cosmos, even if scattered beyond practical reconstruction. Nothing is ever truly forgotten by the universe itself. Yet perhaps more unsettling is the possibility that information destruction is real. If black holes can erase information, then the universe might contain lacunae, gaps in its causal fabric, events whose traces have been completely expunged from reality. The past would not be merely unknown, but in some sense incomplete, with portions irrevocably lost to the cosmic void. This possibility challenges our intuitive sense of time and causality. We naturally think of the past as fixed, immutable and deterministic, even if inaccessible. But if information can be truly destroyed, then perhaps the past itself is more fluid, less absolute than we imagine. The journal that fell into the black hole wouldn't just be gone. In some profound sense, it might never have existed at all. Modern physics has proposed several potential resolutions to the paradox. String theory suggests that black holes might be incredibly complex, highly entangled quantum systems, capable of preserving information in ways that aren't apparent in our current understanding. Loop quantum gravity proposes that spacetime itself has a discrete, atomic structure that prevents the formation of true singularities, potentially preserving information through quantum effects. One of the most influential proposals is the holographic principle, which suggests that all the information contained within a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary surface. Applied to black holes, this principle implies that information about everything that falls in might be preserved on the event horizon, a two-dimensional surface that fully describes the three-dimensional interior. As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider that perhaps the paradox reveals something profound about knowledge itself. What does it mean for information to exist if it can never again be accessed or reconstructed? Is there a meaningful difference between information that is merely scrambled beyond recognition and information that is truly destroyed? What if our universe maintains a perfect memory, not because of some metaphysical requirement, but simply because information destruction would require infinities, singularities that quantum mechanics seems to systematically eliminate from physical theory? Perhaps information conservation is not a fundamental principle, but an emergent property of a universe that avoids infinite quantities. As the gentle darkness of night surrounds you, let this final question linger. What if the resolution to the information paradox lies not in choosing between general relativity and quantum mechanics, but in discovering a deeper theory that reconciles them? What if black holes are not destroyers of information, but rather nature's ultimate encryptors, transforming information into forms so profoundly scrambled that they appear as random thermal noise, yet preserving within that apparent randomness the complete record of everything they have ever encountered? In this moment of quiet reflection, perhaps you glimpse the fundamental mystery at the heart of existence, a universe that seems simultaneously deterministic and random, remembered and forgotten, preserved and destroyed, inviting us ever deeper into the enigma of reality itself, the infinite regression paradox. What happens when every answer leads to another question, forever? What if every explanation we discover only leads to deeper questions? What if beneath each answer lies another mystery, beneath each cause another cause, creating an endless chain stretching into infinity? Perhaps the most profound paradox is not what we know, but the very structure of knowing itself. Welcome to the borderlands of understanding, where certainty gives way to endless depth. Tonight, we explore a paradox that lies at the heart of our quest for ultimate knowledge, the infinite regression. Are we capable of finding final answers, or are we destined to follow questions that never end? Imagine yourself peering into a mirror that faces another mirror. Between them stretches a corridor of reflections, each smaller than the last, diminishing toward a point your eyes cannot resolve. You strain to see the final image, but it eludes you, not because it's hidden, but because there is no final image. The regression continues beyond the limits of perception. This is the first layer of our paradox, the problem of infinite explanatory chains. When a child asks, why? To each answer you provide, eventually you reach a point where you must either admit, I don't know, or circle back to previous explanations. Is this merely a limitation of human knowledge, or does it reveal something fundamental about reality itself? The ancient philosophers confronted this dilemma when seeking the ultimate cause of existence. Aristotle proposed a prime mover, an uncaused cause that initiates all subsequent effects. Yet doesn't this solution merely sidestep the paradox? What caused the prime mover? If nothing did, why accept that one thing can exist without cause when we demand causes for everything else? But our exploration deepens when we turn to knowledge itself. How do you know what you claim to know? Through evidence. But how do you know that evidence is reliable? Through meta-evidence. And how do you know that meta-evidence is reliable? The chain continues, threatening to undermine the very possibility of certainty. Is this not the ultimate expression of our paradox? That perhaps complete understanding is structurally impossible, not because answers don't exist, but because justification itself may be infinitely regressive. Some philosophers, like Hans Albert, called this the Munchausen trilemma. We must either accept infinite regression, circular reasoning, or arbitrary foundational assumptions. Perhaps more unsettling is how this extends to consciousness itself. What is the nature of the mind that poses these questions? If consciousness emerges from the brain, what gives rise to those neural processes? If physical laws, what gives those laws their specific form? If mathematical principles, what is the source of mathematics? Each answer becomes a new doorway to deeper questions. As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. Perhaps infinity itself is not a problem, but a feature of reality. What if existence is fundamentally recursive, like fractals that contain smaller versions of themselves, patterns within patterns, extending without limit? What if the cosmos is not built upon a solid foundation, but is instead turtles all the way down, as the old story suggests? The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein offered a different approach. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Perhaps there is wisdom in recognizing the limits of explanation, not as failures of understanding, but as boundaries that define the nature of understanding itself. Time, too, becomes caught in this regression. What happened before the Big Bang? And what came before that? And before that? If time itself began, what could before even mean? If the universe is eternal, how could an infinite past have elapsed to reach this moment? As your mind continues to follow these cascading questions like a staircase descending into mist, consider one final aspect: self-reference. The mind contemplating infinite regression is itself part of the system it attempts to understand. Can a system fully comprehend itself? Or are there always blind spots, limitations inherent to being both the observer and the observed? What if the infinite regression is not a flaw in our thinking, but a glimpse of the actual structure of reality? Endless, recursive, without ultimate foundation. What if the search for final answers is misguided, and wisdom lies in embracing the infinite depth of the questioning itself? As you now hover at the threshold between wakefulness and dreams, lingering in that space where thought dissolves into something more fluid, ask yourself, is your consciousness a singular thing? Or is it like those facing mirrors, containing worlds within worlds within worlds? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that in confronting the limits of explanation, we discover something profound about the nature of mind, that it can recognize its own boundaries, peer over the edge of understanding, and find wonder rather than frustration in the endless depths. And in this infinite regression, perhaps we find a profound truth, that reality is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be experienced, not a destination, but an endless journey into ever deeper questions. What if tonight, as consciousness gives way to dreams, you glimpse not answers, but the beautiful endlessness of questioning itself? What visions might emerge from minds that have made peace with infinite regress, the future past? Paradox. What if yesterday depends on tomorrow, just as much as tomorrow depends on yesterday? What if time is not an arrow that flies in one direction, but a circle that bends back upon itself? What if the future somehow reaches into the past, shaping what we think has already happened? Perhaps the greatest illusion is not space or matter, but our linear perception of time itself. Welcome to the realm where causality dissolves and certainty melts away like morning mist. Tonight, we explore a paradox that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about reality, the future-past paradox. Are we moving through time, Or is time moving through us in ways we have yet to comprehend? Imagine yourself standing between two mirrors facing each other. In one direction, you see reflections of what lies behind you, the past. In the other, reflections of what lies ahead, the future. But as you look deeper into either mirror, the images begin to contain elements of both, blurring, merging, until past and future become indistinguishable, each containing and creating the other. This is the first layer of our paradox, the problem of causal loops. We assume that cause precedes effect, that the past shapes the future. But what if certain effects could precede their causes? What if tomorrow could influence yesterday? The physicist John Wheeler proposed the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, suggesting that measurements made in the present could alter how particles behaved in the past. In quantum physics, particles can exist in superpositions of states until observed, and this observation appears to retroactively determine their prior states. Is the past truly fixed, or is it partially shaped by future events? But our exploration deepens when we consider consciousness itself. Your memories, your entire sense of the past, exist only in the present moment. The past as you know it is a reconstruction, a story told now about what may have happened then. If your present consciousness constructs your experience of the past, doesn't the future, which becomes the present, create the past rather than simply following from it? Is this not the ultimate expression of our paradox? That perhaps time as we experience it is not fundamental but emergent, not a one-way street, but a complex landscape where future and past may interact in ways our linear minds struggle to comprehend. Perhaps more unsettling is how this extends to identity itself. You believe you are the same person you were yesterday because of continuous memory, yet neuroscience tells us memories are not fixed recordings, but active reconstructions that change each time they're recalled. Your present self literally rewrites your past self with each remembering. Is your identity flowing forward through time, or is it being continuously recreated backward? As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. Ancient traditions from Buddhism to certain interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that time as we perceive it may be illusory, that past, present, and future may coexist in what physicists call a block universe. What if all moments exist simultaneously, and it is only our consciousness that experiences them sequentially? The philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of time not as a series of nows moving past a fixed observer, but as an intrinsic structure of being itself. We reach into the future through our intentions and projects, while simultaneously being shaped by our understanding of the past. For Heidegger, past and future are not separate realms, but dimensions of our present experience. Memory and anticipation intermingle in curious ways. Your expectations of the future color how you remember the past, while your interpretation of the past shapes what futures you can imagine. If past and future are mutually constructing each other within consciousness, where does one truly end and the other begin? As your mind continues to explore these temporal paradoxes, like a traveler in an Escher drawing, consider one final aspect: retrocausality. If information can travel backward in time, even at the quantum level, might our future selves be subtly influencing our present choices? Might intuition sometimes be the future reaching back to guide us? What if time is less like a line and more like music, where each note gains its meaning from both the notes that preceded it and those that will follow? What if past, present, and future are engaged in a constant dialogue, each defining and redefining the others in an eternal conversation? As you now hover at the boundary between different states of consciousness, lingering in that timeless space where thoughts become dreams, ask yourself, when you make a choice, are you creating the future, or is the choice itself emerging from a future that in some sense already exists? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that we experience time as flowing while simultaneously being the medium through which it flows, both the river and the riverbed, both the music and the instrument that plays it. And in this temporal paradox, perhaps we find a profound truth, that consciousness itself may be the meeting place where past and future converge, where memory and anticipation dance together in the eternal now. What if tonight, as wakefulness gives way to sleep and linear time dissolves in the realm of dreams, you experience moments where cause and effect reverse, where endings become beginnings, where tomorrow shapes yesterday? What visions might emerge when time's arrow no longer flies in just one direction? The eternal recurrence paradox. What if you've lived this exact life infinite times before and will continue to do so forever? What if this moment, this exact thought, this precise feeling, this very breath you're taking now, has occurred countless times before and will repeat infinitely into the future? What if the universe is caught in an eternal loop, playing and replaying the same cosmic drama, with you destined to live this identical life over and over again? Welcome to the realm where eternity meets identity, where the linear path of time curves back upon itself like a great Ouroboros. Tonight, we explore a paradox that has haunted philosophers and dreamers alike, the eternal recurrence. Are we living unique lives, or merely experiencing one iteration of an endless cycle? Imagine yourself standing before an hourglass. You watch as the final grain of sand falls through the narrow passage, marking the end of one cycle. But rather than stopping, the hourglass instantly inverts itself, beginning the process anew. Each grain follows precisely the same path it took before. Each moment recreates itself exactly as it was. Is this not the universe itself? A grand cosmic hourglass turning and returning eternally. This is the first layer of our paradox, the problem of cosmic repetition. Friedrich Nietzsche proposed this thought experiment. Given infinite time and finite matter in the universe, every possible configuration must eventually repeat. If the universe endures eternally, then this moment, this life, must recur again and again, identical in every detail. But our exploration deepens when we consider the implications for meaning itself. If everything repeats eternally, is anything truly consequential? Does significance exist when every action, every creation, every destruction merely fulfills a predetermined pattern that will cycle endlessly? Or does eternal recurrence instead imbue each moment with infinite weight, each choice echoing forever through endless iterations of reality? Is this not the ultimate expression of our paradox? That perhaps eternal recurrence simultaneously renders everything both meaningless and supremely meaningful. Nietzsche called this the greatest weight, to live as if each decision would repeat eternally, to affirm life so completely that you would willingly live it again and again in exactly the same way. Perhaps more unsettling is how this extends to consciousness itself. If you will live this exact life countless times, are your current thoughts and feelings truly your own? Or are they echoes of previous cycles? Is your sense of originality, of free will, merely an illusion within a predetermined cosmic loop? And if you've lived this exact moment before, why can't you remember previous iterations? As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. Ancient traditions from Hinduism to Stoicism embraced cyclical views of time, cosmic cycles of creation and destruction, the eternal return of the same. The Aztec calendar depicted time as circular rather than linear. What if these weren't mere metaphors, but intuitions of a profound cosmic truth, that existence itself is cyclical? The physicist Ludwig Boltzmann suggested that given enough time, even the most improbable states of matter will occur. If the universe is eternal, then your exact configuration of atoms must eventually reassemble itself after your death. Is this scientific resurrection not a form of eternal recurrence? Time itself becomes paradoxical in this model. If everything repeats exactly, how would one cycle differ from another? Without difference, do they constitute separate events? Or is there only one eternal event playing out in a cosmic loop? If there is no beginning or end to the cycle, can we even speak of before and after? As your mind continues to orbit these questions like planets around a strange attractor, consider one final aspect: memory. If eternal recurrence is true, why don't we remember previous cycles? Perhaps the forgetting itself is part of the pattern. Perhaps memory cannot transcend the boundaries of a single iteration. Or perhaps the illusion of novelty is necessary for the cycle to continue. What if déjà vu, that uncanny feeling that you've experienced something before, is not a neurological glitch, but a momentary glimpse through the veil, a brief remembrance of previous cycles bleeding into current awareness? What if intuition itself is memory from past iterations guiding you through this one? As you now hover at the threshold of different states of consciousness, lingering in that liminal space where thought dissolves into dream, ask yourself, if everything in your life were to repeat exactly as it has occurred, eternally, would you embrace this revelation or find it terrifying? Would you live differently if you knew each moment would echo forever? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that the mere contemplation of eternal recurrence transforms how we might live, even if the theory itself can never be proven or disproven. In facing eternity, we discover something profound about how we wish to inhabit the present. And in this cyclical paradox, perhaps we find a profound truth, that the weight of existence lies not in its duration, but in its quality, not in its uniqueness, but in its affirmation, not in escaping recurrence, but in embracing it so completely that we would will it to be so. What if tonight, as consciousness cycles into sleep, and sleep eventually returns to waking, you glimpse not just the small daily cycle, but the grand cosmic one? What dreams might emerge from minds contemplating their own eternal return? The Bootstrap Reality Paradox. What if the universe created itself with no external cause or creator? What if existence itself is self-creating? What if, rather than proceeding from some external cause or creator, the universe somehow bootstraps itself into being, arising from nothing through a paradoxical loop where effect becomes cause of itself? Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what created reality, but how reality might create itself. Welcome to the edge of understanding, where causality folds back upon itself like a Mobius strip with no beginning or end. Tonight, we explore a paradox that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about existence. The Bootstrap Paradox. Can something truly be its own origin, or does our logic fail at the boundaries of creation itself? Imagine a watch that appears mysteriously on your doorstep. You keep it for decades until you discover time travel, then journey to the past and leave the watch on your own doorstep before returning to the present. The watch exists, yet it was never manufactured. It simply loops through time, aging, but never being created. Where did the watch come from? When was it made? By whom? This is the first layer of our paradox, the problem of self-causation. Information or objects that exist without ever being created, merely cycling through a closed temporal loop. While time travel may be fictional, this thought experiment reveals something profound about our assumptions regarding causality and origin. But our exploration deepens when we consider the universe itself. Physicists propose models where space-time forms a closed loop with no definite beginning. The mathematician Kurt Gödel discovered solutions to Einstein's equations, showing universes where time curves back upon itself. What if our universe somehow causes its own existence through such a temporal or causal loop? Some quantum cosmologists suggest the universe might emerge from quantum fluctuations in a vacuum, essentially arising from nothing through principles inherent to that nothingness. Is this not a cosmic-scale version of the Bootstrap Paradox? Reality emerging from itself, with no external cause necessary. Is this not the ultimate expression of our paradox? That perhaps existence itself is fundamentally self-referential, like an Escher drawing where each part seems to create the others in an impossible loop. What if creation doesn't require a creator, but merely a paradoxical circularity where being generates itself? Perhaps more unsettling is how this extends to consciousness. Your sense of self arises from neural processes that exist because you evolved to have a brain capable of self-awareness. Yet this self-awareness is what allows you to conceive of yourself as an evolving being in the first place. Isn't consciousness itself a kind of bootstrap paradox, both the creator and creation of our sense of identity? As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. Ancient traditions from Taoism to certain mystical branches of Abrahamic faiths speak of reality as self-generating. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, appears across cultures as a symbol of cyclic creation, a visual representation of self-causation. What if these weren't merely spiritual metaphors, but intuitions of a profound cosmic truth? The philosopher Douglas Hofstadter describes strange loops, where patterns at one level emerge from and return to themselves at another level. Our DNA contains instructions to build organisms that then reproduce to pass on that same DNA. Languages evolve through use by speakers who themselves developed through language. Everywhere we look, reality seems to bootstrap itself into increasing complexity. Creation itself becomes paradoxical in this light. We typically assume that nothing can be the cause of itself, that every effect must have a prior cause in endless regression. But what if this assumption is merely a limitation of linear thinking? What if causality at the foundation of reality is not linear, but circular, or even more complexly self-referential? As your mind continues to explore these strange loops like a wanderer in an impossible landscape, consider one final aspect: meaning. If reality creates itself, then meaning too might be self-generated rather than imposed from outside. What if value, purpose, and significance are not received from some transcendent source, but emerge from the same self-creating process that generates existence itself? What if reality is less like a chain of causes and more like a piece of music that creates the very rules it follows as it unfolds? What if creation is not a single event, but an ongoing process where existence continuously generates itself in each moment? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that in contemplating self-causation, we engage in a kind of mental bootstrapping. Our thoughts loop back upon themselves, becoming both the questioner and the questioned, both the explorer and the territory being explored. And in this self-creating paradox, perhaps we find a profound truth, that existence itself may be fundamentally creative rather than created, a perpetual emergence with no beginning or end, no creator or creation, only the eternal dance of being becoming itself. What if tonight, as wakefulness recedes into dreams, you glimpse not the created universe, but the creating one? What visions might emerge when the mind contemplates its own self-generation? The existence paradox. Why is there something rather than nothing? What if the most profound question isn't about how the universe works, but why there is a universe at all? What if the true mystery isn't the nature of existence, but existence itself? Perhaps the deepest paradox lies not in the complexity of being, but in the simple, astonishing fact that anything exists whatsoever. Welcome to the most fundamental question of all, the precipice where thought confronts the sheer marvel of being. Tonight, we explore a paradox that has haunted philosophers, scientists, and mystics across time: the existence paradox. Why is there something rather than nothing? Imagine absolute nothingness, not darkness, for darkness is something, not emptiness, for emptiness is a kind of presence, not even void, for void implies space. True nothingness would have no properties, no dimensions, no potential, no laws. From such perfect absence, how could presence ever arise? Yet here we are, in a universe of extraordinary complexity and presence. This is the first layer of our paradox, the problem of emergence from nothing. Philosopher Gottfried Leibniz formulated it precisely. Why is there something rather than nothing? For nothing is simpler and easier than something. Logically, it seems that non-existence should be the default state of reality. Existence requires explanation. Non-existence is self-explanatory. But our exploration deepens when we consider the nature of nothing itself. Is perfect nothingness even conceptually possible? The quantum vacuum, once thought to be empty space, teems with virtual particles continuously popping in and out of existence. Modern physics suggests that nothing may be unstable, inherently prone to becoming something. Some cosmologists propose that the positive energy of matter in our universe is precisely balanced by the negative energy of gravity, making the net energy of the cosmos effectively zero. Is this not an expression of our paradox? That perhaps the universe is, in some profound sense, still nothing, just nothing arranged in a complex way that appears to be something. Is this not the ultimate expression of our paradox? That perhaps being and non-being are not opposites, but complementary aspects of a reality so fundamental, it precedes the distinction between existence and non-existence. What if the question itself contains a false dichotomy, and the truth lies beyond our binary conception of something versus nothing? Perhaps more unsettling is how this extends to consciousness itself. Your awareness, this mysterious capacity to experience being, somehow emerges from physical processes that in isolation possess no apparent experiential qualities. How does subjectivity itself, the very ground of experiencing something rather than nothing, arise from elements that themselves don't seem to possess awareness? As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider this. Traditions from Taoism to certain interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that existence and non-existence may be interwoven, that being emerges from non-being, like figures from negative space, each defining the other in an eternal dance. The Tao Te Ching begins. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Being and non-being create each other. The philosopher Martin Heidegger suggested that the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is the most fundamental question of metaphysics. Yet he also proposed that the very framing of the question already presupposes categories of thought that may not apply to the mystery itself. Perhaps the question can never be answered because it emerges from the very existence it questions. Possibility itself becomes paradoxical in this light. For something to be possible, there must already be something, some framework of potential, some rules governing what can emerge. But if truly nothing existed, could possibility itself exist? Could the potential for something arise from perfect nothingness? Or does the very concept of potential already imply something rather than nothing? As your mind continues to orbit this impossible question like light around a black hole, consider one final aspect: necessity. Spinoza argued that existence itself might be necessary rather than contingent. What if being is not something that happens against the backdrop of possible non-being, but the very nature of reality itself? What if existence is not a state, but the only possible foundation? What if the human mind, evolved to navigate within existence, simply cannot comprehend the true nature of being versus non-being? What if we are like fish trying to understand the concept of dryness, fundamentally limited by our immersion in the very thing we're trying to examine? As you now hover at the threshold of different states of consciousness, lingering in that space where presence dissolves into absence and back again, ask yourself, is your awareness itself a clue to this cosmic riddle? Is consciousness, this capacity to experience something rather than nothing, somehow connected to the fundamental nature of existence itself? Perhaps the greatest paradox is that in contemplating why there is something rather than nothing, we demonstrate the universe's remarkable capacity to generate beings who question their own existence, as if existence itself has evolved the ability to wonder at its own presence. And in this most fundamental paradox, perhaps we find a profound truth, that existence may not be a state or condition, but the ongoing asking of the question itself, reality wondering at its own being through creatures capable of astonishment. What if tonight, as wakefulness yields to sleep and presence gives way to absence, you glimpse not the answer to existence, but the perfect question? What dreams might emerge from minds contemplating the sheer marvel that anything exists at all?